She sat in a dead woman's chair reading a dead woman's diary, and when Jacob Mercer pushed open that cabin door after 10 years of solitude, his heart damn near stopped, because the woman waiting in his Wyoming wilderness looked exactly like the wife he'd buried in the blizzard of '77. Was he losing his mind? Or had Clara somehow come back from the frozen ground? Then she spoke. "I'm Anna, Clara's sister." And everything Jacob thought he knew about love guilt and second chances shattered like ice. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The Wyoming wind carried ghosts that autumn of 1887. Jacob Mercer had learned to live with them. 10 years was long enough for a man to get comfortable with silence, long enough for the echoes of laughter to fade from log walls, long enough for the empty chair by the fire to become just another piece of furniture instead of a monument to loss. He'd built a life around absence the way some men built lives around whiskey or gold, carefully, deliberately making sure every day looked exactly like the one before. That's why the smoke rising from his cabin chimney hit him like a fist to the gut. Jacob reined in his horse on the ridge overlooking his property, his weathered hand automatically moving to the Winchester rifle in his saddle scabbard. The October sun was dropping fast behind the Medicine Bow Range, painting the sky in shades of blood and amber, and that thin column of smoke stood out against the darkening blue like an accusation. Nobody came out here. Nobody had any reason to. His ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, 30 from the railroad town of Rawlins, tucked into a valley where the North Platte River bent like a silver snake through land so remote that even the cattle rustlers and road agents generally passed it by. That isolation had been exactly what Jacob wanted after Clara died, a place where he could work himself to exhaustion during the day and drink himself to numbness at night, where no well-meaning souls would knock on his door with casseroles and sympathy, where he could bury his grief so deep that sometimes for whole hours at a time he could almost forget it existed. But someone was in his cabin now. Jacob's jaw tightened as he urged his horse down the slope, his eyes scanning the property with the practiced caution of a man who'd fought in the war, survived the Indian campaigns, and learned that hesitation could get you killed. The corral gate was closed. No strange horses visible. The barn doors were shut tight. Everything looked exactly as he'd left it that morning when he'd ridden out to check the north pasture fence line, except for that smoke, and the fact that when he got close enough he could see lamplight glowing warm and golden through the cabin windows. Something he never bothered with when he came home after dark, preferring to stumble to bed in darkness rather than waste kerosene on a house that held no one but him. Jacob dismounted 20 yards from the front porch, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with barely a sound. He left his horse ground-tied, approached the cabin from the side, and pressed himself against the rough log wall next to the window. Through the gap in the curtains Clara had sewn from flour sacks and dyed with coffee curtains he'd never replaced, because doing so felt like erasure he could see inside. And his heart stopped. There was a woman sitting in Clara's rocking chair. Not just any woman. A woman with honey blonde hair pinned up in a loose knot at the nape of her neck with delicate features that seemed too refined for the frontier, with a blue calico dress that looked achingly familiar. She was reading something, her head bent over the pages, and the lamplight caught in her hair, the same way it used to catch in Clara's, turning it to spun gold. Jacob's breath came short and sharp. His hand trembled on the rifle stock. For one impossible, heart-stopping moment, he thought, no, that was insanity. Clara was dead. He'd buried her himself in the frozen ground behind the cabin, had stood over her grave during the blizzard, and watched the snow cover the fresh-turned earth like a shroud. He'd carved her headstone from granite, had planted wild roses that bloomed every spring, had spent 10 years learning to wake up in a world where she didn't exist. But Christ, this woman looked like her. Jacob forced himself to breathe, to think, to push past the shock that had turned his bones to water. Not Clara. Couldn't be Clara. Which meant either he was dealing with a squatter who'd broken into his home, or he was losing his goddamn mind. Only one way to find out. He moved to the front door, raised his boot, and kicked it open with enough force to send it crashing against the inside wall. The woman's scream cut through the cabin like a knife. She shot to her feet, the book tumbling from her hands, her eyes wide with terror as Jacob filled the doorway with his rifle raised. She stumbled backward, her hip catching the edge of the table hard enough to make her gasp, her hands coming up in a gesture that was half defense, half surrender. "Please," she said, her voice high and frightened. "Please don't shoot." Jacob didn't lower the rifle. His eyes tracked every detail with the cold assessment of a man who'd learned not to trust appearances. She was younger than Clara had been, maybe 22 or 23 to Clara's 28. Thinner, too, with a delicacy that spoke of city living rather than frontier hardship. But the resemblance was there in the curve of her cheek, the shape of her eyes, the way her lower lip trembled when she was scared. "Who the hell are you?" Jacob's voice came out rougher than he'd intended, shaped by 10 years of disuse and a throat tight with emotions he didn't want to name. "And what the hell are you doing in my house?" The woman's hands were still raised, but something shifted in her expression. Fear giving way to recognition. Recognition giving way to something that looked almost like relief. "You're Jacob," she said. "Jacob Mercer." It wasn't a question. "Answer me." Jacob's finger rested against the trigger guard, not quite threatening, not quite safe. "Now." "I'm Anna." She swallowed hard, her throat working. "Anna Whitmore. I'm Clara's sister." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. The rifle barrel dipped just an inch before he caught himself and brought it back up. "Clara didn't have a sister." "Yes, she did." Anna's voice was steadier now, though her hands still shook. "She had me. I was 12 when she married you and moved west. I'm 23 now, and Clara wrote to me. For 7 years she wrote to me every month, until the letters stopped." Jacob's mind was reeling. Clara had mentioned a younger sister exactly once on their wedding night, when she'd cried into his shoulder and said she'd had to leave her baby sister behind in Denver with their aunt. He'd asked about bringing the girl west to live with them, but Clara had said no. Said Anna was better off with their aunt's money, and society connections said the frontier was no place for a child. Said someday maybe when Anna was older and married they could visit. But they'd never gotten that someday. The pneumonia had taken Clara before Anna was even old enough to make her own choices. "Prove it," Jacob said. Anna slowly lowered one hand, reached into the pocket of her dress, and pulled out a small leather-bound book. The same book she'd been reading when Jacob had looked through the window. She held it out toward him, her fingers white-knuckled around the spine. "This is Clara's diary. She kept it for the first year after she married you. She wrote about how you built this cabin with your own hands, how you brought her wildflowers every Sunday, how you taught her to ride a horse even though she was terrified. She wrote about the blizzard." Anna's voice cracked. "She wrote about feeling so happy she thought her heart would burst. And she wrote about me, about how she missed me, about how she hoped I'd come visit someday." Jacob stared at the diary. He'd never seen it before, hadn't known Clara kept one, but he recognized the handwriting visible on the page, where Anna held it open, those neat, careful letters that Clara had always formed with such precision, evidence of the expensive education her aunt had provided before poverty and pride had driven Clara west to marry a rancher she'd met exactly twice. Slowly, Jacob lowered the rifle. Anna let out a shaky breath, her whole body sagging with relief. She set the diary carefully on the table as if it were made of glass, then wrapped her arms around herself in a gesture that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her years. "How did you get here?" Jacob asked. His voice was still hard, but some of the edge had gone out of it. "Trained to Rollins, paid a freighter $20 to bring me and my trunk this far. He left me at the bottom of your road 2 hours ago." Anna glanced toward the door where dusk was rapidly giving way to full dark. I'm sorry I let myself in. The door was unlocked and it was getting cold, and I thought you'd be home soon." Jacob moved past her into the cabin, propping the rifle against the wall by the door. The space felt strange with another person in it, smaller somehow. The air charged with an energy that had been absent for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like. He could smell something cooking, realized with a start that there was a pot hanging over the fire, steam rising from whatever was inside. "You cooked," he said. Anna nodded. "I found potatoes and salt pork in your larder. I hope that's all right. I didn't know when you'd be back and I was hungry." "It's fine." Jacob moved to the fire, lifted the lid on the pot. and was hit with a smell that was almost but not quite like the stews Clara used to make. His stomach clenched with hunger. He'd been living on jerky and hardtack for so long that a hot meal seemed like something from another life entirely. Anna was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You look different than I expected," she said quietly. "Clara's letters made you sound younger somehow." Jacob almost laughed. He was 38 years old, but he knew he looked older. Sun-weathered skin lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth, gray, threading through the dark brown of his hair. 10 years of hard living would do that to a man. 10 years of grief would do worse. "Your sister died a long time ago," he said flatly. "People change." "I know she died." Anna's voice was soft but steady. "Our aunt wrote to tell me 3 years after it happened. She'd been holding Clara's letters, not sending them on. I was 16. I didn't even get to say goodbye." Something in the way she said it, the quiet devastation beneath the calm words, made Jacob look at her more carefully. Really look at her past the resemblance to Clara, past his own shock and suspicion. What he saw was a young woman standing in a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the possessions of a dead sister. She barely remembered trying to hold herself together with nothing but pride and stubbornness. He knew something about that. "Why now?" Jacob asked. "Why come here after all this time?" Anna's hands twisted together a nervous gesture that made her knuckles go white. "My aunt died 6 months ago. She left me nothing. Turned out she'd been living on credit for years, died with debts I can't pay. The house was sold, everything in it auctioned off. I found Clara's letters and her diary in a trunk in the attic. Reading them was like meeting her again, like having her back." Her voice broke. "And in the last letters she talked about you, about how much she loved you, about how she wanted me to know you, to have a family connection, even though we were so far apart. So I thought maybe—" She trailed off, but Jacob could fill in the blanks. Anna had lost everything, had no money and no prospects, and had come west with some half-formed hope that her dead sister's husband might take her in out of charity or obligation or grief. The smart thing would be to put her on the train back east tomorrow, give her some money, point her toward Denver or Chicago or Boston, send her somewhere civilized where a young woman with breeding and manners could find work as a governess or companion. This ranch was no place for someone like her, someone soft and educated and utterly unprepared for the brutal reality of frontier life. But Jacob found himself saying, "You can stay the night. There's a bed in the back room. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Anna's eyes went wide. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean you can stay the night," Jacob repeated. "Don't read more into it than that." But even as he said it, he knew he was lying to himself. Because standing there in the lamplight with Clara's diary on the table and Anna's hopeful face turned toward him, Jacob felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. He felt less alone. They ate the stew in silence, sitting across from each other at the rough-hewn table Jacob had built in the first year of his marriage. The food was bland. Anna hadn't found the herbs Clara used to grow in the window box, and she'd clearly never learned how to properly season salt pork. But it was hot and filling, and Jacob cleaned his bowl twice while Anna picked at hers with the delicate manners of someone who'd been taught that ladies didn't show hunger. Afterward, Anna washed the dishes in the basin while Jacob sat by the fire, ostensibly cleaning his rifle, but mostly watching her move around the cabin. She was clumsy in the small space, unused to the low ceiling beams and the rough floorboards that caught at her skirts. She bumped her elbow on the cupboard door, nearly dropped a tin plate, and had to stand on tiptoe to reach the shelf where the clean dishes went. Nothing like Clara, who'd moved through this cabin as if she'd been born to it. "I'm not very good at this," Anna said suddenly, as if she'd felt his gaze and read his thoughts. She was standing at the basin, her hands dripping soapy water, her face flushed with embarrassment. "At any of this? Cooking, cleaning, housekeeping? My aunt raised me to marry well, not to work. She said frontier skills were beneath our station." Her mouth twisted. "Turns out our station was built on lies and debt." Jacob set the rifle aside. "Your sister didn't know how to do any of that either when she first came here." Anna turned to look at him, surprise clear on her face. "Really? Really?" Jacob leaned back in his chair, the memory rising unbidden. Clara standing in almost the same spot, staring in horror at her first attempt at bread, which had come out of the Dutch oven black as coal and hard as stone. She'd cried and Jacob had held her, and then they'd laughed until their sides hurt, and he'd taught her how to gauge the heat of the coals and knead the dough until it was just right. She burned everything for the first month, Jacob continued. Set the curtains on fire once trying to light the lamp. Fell off her horse so many times I thought she'd break her neck. But she learned. She was stubborn as hell, and she learned. Stubborn runs in the family, Anna said quietly. She turned back to the dishes, but Jacob could see the slight curve of a smile on her lips. When the dishes were done and dried and put away, Anna stood awkwardly in the middle of the cabin, clearly uncertain what to do next. Jacob realized with a jolt that he hadn't thought about sleeping arrangements for 10 years. He'd had the whole cabin to himself. And now there was a woman here who needed privacy and safety, and all the things he'd stopped thinking about when Clara died. "The back room," he said gruffly, nodding toward the small space behind the main cabin. "There's a bed in there. It's where where we used to sleep." Anna's eyes widened. "I can't take your bed. I don't sleep there anymore." Jacob stood, moved to the door, and pulled it open to reveal the tiny bedroom beyond. It was exactly as he'd left it 10 years ago. The same quilt Clara had stitched, the same rag rug she'd braided, the same photograph of her parents on the dresser. He hadn't been able to make himself change anything, but he also hadn't been able to make himself sleep in there after she died. For a decade, he'd been sleeping in the chair by the fire, or when the nightmares got too bad on the floor. "Where will you sleep?" Anna asked. "Out here, like I always do." Jacob moved to the chest in the corner, pulled out a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and camphor. "You'll be safe in there. Door has a lock on it. Use it if you want." Anna looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said softly, "Thank you." She disappeared into the bedroom, and Jacob heard the sound of the lock clicking into place. He stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, feeling the weight of the day settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. Then he banked. The fire blew out the lamps and settled into his chair with the blanket pulled around him. The cabin was dark and quiet the way it had been for 10 years, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Jacob woke before dawn, the way he always did, his body trained to rise with the sun, even when his mind was heavy with fractured dreams. He'd spent the night half awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else breathing behind that closed door, and now his back ached from the chair and his head felt stuffed with wool. He made coffee in the darkness, the familiar ritual grounding him. The smell filled the cabin strong and bitter, the way he'd learned to drink it during the war when there was nothing else to keep you warm in the winter camps. He was on his second cup when he heard the bedroom door open. Anna emerged looking rumpled and uncertain, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, still wearing the blue calico dress because she clearly hadn't thought to change into nightclothes. Jacob found himself staring at that dress, at the way the morning light through the window turned it the same shade of cornflower blue that Clara used to wear. "Is that coffee?" Anna asked, her voice rough with sleep. Jacob poured her a cup without asking if she wanted one. She took it gratefully, wrapped her hands around the tin mug, and took a sip. Then her face contorted and she coughed, her eyes watering. "It's strong," she managed. "It's coffee." Jacob refilled his own cup. "If you want milk and sugar, you're 10 years too late." Anna took another cautious sip, visibly forcing herself not to grimace. "No, it's fine. I'll get used to it." Jacob studied her over the rim of his mug. In the harsh morning light, she looked younger than she had the night before, shadows under her eyes, her skin pale and drawn. She'd clearly slept poorly, and he wondered if she'd lain awake in Claire's bed, staring at Claire's things, feeling the presence of a sister she barely remembered. "We need to talk," Jacob said abruptly. Anna set her cup down, her hands trembling slightly. "All right." Jacob moved to the table, sat down heavily. After a moment, Anna followed, taking the chair across from him, the chair she'd been sitting in when he'd first seen her through the window. For some reason, that bothered him more than he wanted to examine. "You can't stay here," Jacob said. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but he pushed forward before he could lose his nerve. "This isn't a life for you. You're educated. You've got manners. You'd do fine in a city somewhere. I can give you enough money to get to Denver, help you find a position as a governess or a companion. Hell, you're pretty enough. You could probably find a husband within a month if you wanted. But here, there's nothing here for you." Anna's face had gone very still. "Nothing. Nothing," Jacob repeated. This is hard country. It breaks most men and damn near every woman. Your sister was strong as nails, and it still nearly killed her a dozen times before the pneumonia finally did. You wouldn't last a winter. You don't know that. I know you can't cook, can't ride, can barely wash dishes without hurting yourself. Jacob's voice was rough. I'm not trying to be cruel, girl. I'm trying to be honest. This ranch is barely scraping by as it is. I don't have time or energy to teach you everything you'd need to know to survive out here. Anna's jaw tightened. I didn't come here expecting you to take care of me. Then what did you expect? I don't know. The words burst out of her sudden and fierce. I don't know what I expected. All right, I just knew I had nowhere else to go. My aunt is dead, my parents are dead, Clara is dead, and I'm completely alone in the world. I found those letters and I thought maybe there was still family somewhere. Maybe there was still someone who'd remember Clara, who'd care that she existed, who'd care that I exist. Her voice cracked. Maybe I was wrong. Jacob felt something twist in his chest. When Anna had first said those words the night before I'm Clara's sister, he'd been too shocked to process what they really meant. But now, in the cold light of morning, he understood. She wasn't just some stranger looking for charity. She was the last living piece of Clara in the world, and he was about to send her away. I can work, Anna said into the silence. I know I don't know how to do anything useful right now, but I can learn. Clara learned. You said so yourself. I'm just as stubborn as she was, maybe more. Just give me a chance. Give me 1 month. If I can't pull my weight by then, I'll leave without argument. But please, Jacob, please don't send me away before I even try. Jacob wanted to say no. Wanted to put her on a horse today, ride her into Rollins, and put her on the eastbound train before he could make the mistake of letting her stay. Because he could see where this was heading, he'd get used to having her around, start depending on her. And then something would happen. She'd get sick or injured, or she'd realize how hard this life really was, or she'd meet some young cowboy in town and marry him, and Jacob would be alone again. And he didn't think he could survive being alone again, not after having someone here, not after hearing another voice in the cabin and smelling cooking food and seeing lamplight in the windows. But when he looked at Anna's face so like Clara's, and yet so different, vulnerable and fierce and desperately hopeful, he found himself saying, 1 month. Anna's expression transformed. Really? 1 month, Jacob repeated. You do what I tell you, learn what I teach you, and pull your weight. If you can manage that, we'll talk about you staying longer. If you can't, he let the sentence hang. I can, Anna said. Her voice was steady now, her chin lifted with determination. I promise I can. Jacob nodded slowly. All right then, finish your coffee. We've got a lot of work to do. Watch. The next hour was a crash course in frontier reality. Jacob showed Anna the chicken coop where 4 cranky hens clucked and pecked at her when she tried to collect eggs. He showed her the smokehouse where what was left of last winter's venison hung in strips from the ceiling. He showed her the well with its heavy wooden bucket that required real strength to haul up from the depths. He showed her the barn where his horse and the 2 milk cows regarded her with suspicious eyes, and the hayloft where mice scattered at their approach. Anna took it all in with wide eyes, her city-bred sensibilities clearly shocked by the rough simplicity of it all. But to her credit, she didn't complain. She just nodded and asked questions and tried not to flinch when the rooster came at her with his spurs up. First thing you need to learn is how to shoot, Jacob said when they'd finished the tour. He pulled the rifle from where he'd propped it by the cabin door. Out here you can't depend on me being around when trouble comes. You need to be able to defend yourself. Anna stared at the Winchester like it was a snake. I've never touched a gun. Time to start. Jacob handed her the rifle, saw her arms dip with the unexpected weight of it. Hold it like this, stock tight against your shoulder, both hands firm. Look down the sight, find your target. He pointed to a tin can he'd set on a fence post 50 yards away. Anna tried to lift the rifle, nearly dropped it, caught it with a gasp. Jacob moved behind her, reached around to adjust her grip, and felt her stiffen at his proximity. Relax, he said. Can't shoot worth a damn if you're tense. I can't relax with a gun in my hands. Then you better learn. Jacob stepped back. Now sight down the barrel. See the can? Anna squinted. I think so. Don't think, no. Line up the front and rear sights, put them both on target, and squeeze the trigger slow and steady. Don't jerk it. Anna took a shaky breath, tried to do as he said, and pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder with a crack that echoed across the valley. Anna stumbled backward with a cry, and the tin can sat undisturbed on its post. "Missed by a mile," Jacob said. "It hurts." Anna was rubbing her shoulder, her eyes bright with tears she was clearly trying to hold back. "It's going to hurt worse if you need to use it and can't because you never practiced." Jacob took the rifle, ejected the spent cartridge, and chambered another round. Again. They spent an hour on shooting practice. Anna got better. Not good, but better. By the end of it, she'd managed to clip the can once, sending it spinning, and the triumph on her face was so fierce and bright that Jacob felt something warm unfurl in his chest before he could stop it. After shooting came riding. Jacob saddled Clara's old mare, a gentle bay named Rosie, who'd spent the last 10 years eating hay and getting fat in the pasture. Anna approached the horse like it might bite her, which, given Rosie's temperament, was unlikely, but Jacob didn't tell her that. "Put your foot in the stirrup," Jacob instructed. "Left foot, then pull yourself up and swing your right leg over." Anna tried. Failed. Tried again. On the third attempt, she got her foot in the stirrup but couldn't pull herself up, just hung there awkwardly until Jacob grabbed her waist and boosted her into the saddle. The moment his hands touched her, Anna went rigid. Jacob let go like he'd been burned and stepped back. "You're too tense. Horse can feel it. She won't trust you if you don't trust her." "I don't trust her." Anna's hands were white-knuckled on the saddle horn. "She's huge. She's 15 hands and fat as butter. I've seen lapdogs meaner than Rosie." Jacob picked up the reins, handed them to Anna. "Hold these loose. Don't pull unless you want her to stop. Squeeze with your legs to make her go." Anna gave the bear a squeeze. Rosie didn't budge. "Harder!" Anna squeezed harder. Rosie shifted her weight, clearly debating whether this was worth the effort. "Harder." "I'm trying." Anna kicked with both heels, and Rosie finally reluctantly started walking. Anna immediately grabbed the saddle horn with both hands, dropping the reins entirely. Jacob sighed and picked up the lead rope. This was going to be a long month. They worked until dusk, and by the time Jacob finally called it quits, Anna looked ready to collapse. Her face was flushed. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins, and her dress was stained with dirt and hay and things Jacob didn't want to identify. But she hadn't quit, hadn't even asked to stop. Though he'd seen her wince every time she moved her bruised shoulder, seen her bite her lip against complaints, she was too proud to voice. Stubborn as hell, just like Clara. Jacob made dinner that night, fried potatoes and bacon, simple and filling. Anna watched him cook with the focused attention of someone trying to memorize every movement, and when he handed her a plate, she ate like she was starving. "Tomorrow we start at dawn," Jacob said, around a mouthful of potatoes. "You'll milk the cows, collect eggs, feed the chickens. I'll show you how tonight so you can do it yourself in the morning." Anna nodded, too tired to speak. After dinner, Jacob taught her how to coax milk from the cows, an exercise in patience that ended with Anna getting kicked in the shin and barely any milk in the bucket. The chickens were easier once she learned to move slow and keep her hands steady. By the time they finished, full dark had fallen and Anna was swaying on her feet. "Go to bed," Jacob said. Anna didn't argue. She stumbled into the bedroom and closed the door, and within minutes, Jacob could hear the soft, even breathing of exhausted sleep. He sat by the fire, drinking coffee that had gone cold, and stared at the flames. 1 month, he'd said. In 1 month, Anna would either prove she could hack it out here, or she'd be gone and his life would go back to the way it had been for 10 years, silent, solitary, safe. But as Jacob sat there in the firelight, listening to the sound of another person breathing in his cabin, he realized with a sick twist of his gut that he didn't want his life to go back to the way it had been. He wanted her to stay, and that terrified him more than anything had in a decade. The days that followed fell into a brutal rhythm. Anna woke before dawn, stumbled through her morning chores with Jacob's gruff instructions ringing in her ears, and spent the rest of the day learning skills that should have taken years to master. She learned to churn butter until her arms screamed. She learned to mend fences and haul water and split kindling without taking off her own fingers. She learned which plants were edible and which would kill you, learned to read the sky for storms and the wind for changing seasons. She fell off Rosie a dozen more times, got kicked by the cows twice more. cut her hand on a rusted nail, and had to soak it in whiskey to keep the infection out. Burned 3 more meals before she finally managed to produce something Jacob ate without grimacing. And through it all, Jacob watched her. He told himself he was just making sure she didn't get herself killed, but he knew it was more than that. He was watching the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the way she pushed her hair back from her face with the back of one dirty hand, the way her whole face lit up when she finally mastered something new. He was watching her transform from a city girl into something harder, leaner, stronger, watching the softness burn away under the frontier sun until what was left was pure, stubborn will. She was nothing like Clara, he told himself. Clara had been gentle and sweet, had brought civilization to this rough cabin with her careful manners and soft voice. Anna was all sharp edges and fierce determination, more likely to curse when she hurt herself than to cry, more likely to demand another chance than to accept failure. But sometimes in the lamplight, when she smiled at some small victory, Jacob saw his wife's ghost looking out through her sister's eyes, and his heart ached with a longing so fierce it stole his breath. The first week passed, then the second. Anna's hands developed calluses. Her shoulders broadened with muscle. Her face took on color from the sun, and her eyes grew clearer, sharper, more alive. And Jacob found himself looking for excuses to be near her. He'd stand too close when showing her how to oil the harness leather. He'd let his hand linger on her waist when helping her into the saddle. He'd catch himself watching her mouth when she talked, remembering what it felt like to kiss a woman, to hold someone close in the darkness. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. Anna was Clara's sister, for Christ's sake, 23 years old to his 38, innocent and alone in the world, and trusting him to keep her safe. She'd come to him looking for family, not romance. The last thing she needed was a bitter, grief-broken rancher with ghosts in his eyes and whiskey on his breath. But God, he wanted her. The realization came on him slow, like a storm building on the horizon. At first he told himself it was just loneliness, just the ache of 10 years without a woman's touch. Then he told himself it was just because she looked like Clara that he was transferring his grief onto a convenient target. But neither of those things were true, and somewhere around the end of the 3rd week, Jacob stopped lying to himself and admitted the truth. He wanted Anna, not because she looked like Clara, but because she was brave and stubborn and refusing to break no matter how hard this life tried to grind her down. Because she made him laugh with her muttered curses when things went wrong. Because she asked him questions about his past and actually listened to the answers. Because when she looked at him, she didn't see a tragic figure or a lost cause, she just saw a man. And that terrified him, because wanting her meant risking his heart again, and he didn't know if he had the courage for that. But the storm came on a Friday night 3 weeks and 4 days after Anna had arrived. Jacob had seen it building all day, dark clouds massing over the mountains, the wind picking up until it howled through the valley like a living thing. He'd gotten the animals secured and the shutters latched, and by the time the first drop started falling, he and Anna were safely inside with the fire roaring and the lamps lit against the growing darkness. It was a bad storm, the kind that reminded Jacob of the blizzard that had killed Clara. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder cracked like artillery fire. Wind screamed around the cabin corners looking for weaknesses to exploit. Anna stood at the window watching the storm with wide eyes. She'd never seen a prairie tempest like this back east. Storms were gentler, more predictable. This was nature at its most savage, and Jacob could see the fear in the rigid line of her shoulders. "It's all right," he said, moving to stand beside her. "Cabin's weathered worse than this." "How much worse?" Anna's voice was barely audible over the storm. "The blizzard that killed your sister." The words came out before Jacob could stop them. "That was worse. That was like the end of the world." Anna turned to look at him, her face pale in the lamplight. "Will you tell me about it? About what happened to her?" Jacob's first instinct was to refuse the way he'd refused every time someone had asked him about Clara's death over the past 10 years. But something about the storm, about the darkness pressing against the windows, about Anna's quiet courage in the face of her fear, made him want to tell the truth for once. "It was January," he said slowly. "Middle of the worst winter I'd ever seen. Temperatures dropped to 30 below, stayed there for weeks. We'd been snowed in for almost a month, living on stored supplies, and Clara had been coughing for about 2 weeks. I thought it was just a cold at first. By the time I realized it was pneumonia, it was too late to get her to a doctor." Jacob moved away from the window. stood with his back to the fire, the heat of it warming his bones against memories that were cold as death. She fought so hard, he continued. For 3 days she burned with fever. I tried everything, cold compresses, whiskey prayers. Nothing worked. And then on the third night in the middle of the blizzard, she just slipped away, quiet like she was falling asleep. I held her and she was there, and then she wasn't, and His voice broke. I couldn't save her. I couldn't save my own wife. Anna crossed the room to him, moved without hesitation or fear, and took his hand in both of hers. Her fingers were warm, calloused now from work strong. It wasn't your fault, she said. Wasn't it? Jacob laughed bitter. I brought her out here, took her from civilization and comfort and put her in this God-forsaken wilderness. She died because of me. She died because sometimes people die, Jacob. Because disease doesn't care about fault or blame or who deserves to live. She died because, Anna's voice caught, because that's what happens sometimes, and it's not fair, and it's not right, but it's not your fault. Jacob looked down at their joined hands, felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that had been locked tight for a decade, rusted shut with grief and guilt. And for the first time since Clara died, he let himself cry. Not the silent, stoic tears he'd shed at her grave. Real tears, the kind that shook his shoulders and tore from his throat in sounds that were barely human. Anna didn't let go. She just held his hand and stood there with him, solid and present and alive, while the storm raged outside, and Jacob's grief finally broke. When it passed, and it did pass eventually, the way storms always do, Jacob felt hollowed out, emptied like something vital had been carved from his chest. But lighter too, cleaner. Thank you, he said roughly. Anna squeezed his hand once more, then let go. Clara would want you to be happy, you know. She said so in her letters. She said if anything ever happened to her, you should find someone else, have a family, build a life. She didn't want you to be alone. She wrote that. Yes. Anna moved back to the window, gazed out at the storm. She loved you so much, Jacob. Every letter was full of it, how you made her laugh, how safe she felt with you, how grateful she was that you'd chosen her. She wanted you to have that again. Jacob didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that for 10 years he'd been punishing himself for surviving when Clara didn't, that the loneliness had felt like penance, that moving on had seemed like betrayal. But maybe Anna was right. Maybe Clara would want him to be happy. Maybe it was time to stop living with ghosts. The storm was still howling outside when Jacob heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A creak of floorboards on the porch, too heavy to be the wind. The snick of metal on metal that could only be one thing. Someone trying the door latch. Jacob's hand shot to his rifle. Get in the bedroom, Chet, he said quietly. Now. Anna's eyes went wide, but she moved immediately, years of obedience to male authority overriding her questions. She slipped into the bedroom and Jacob heard the lock click. The front door exploded inward. 2 men stumbled in out of the storm, soaked and wild-eyed, and Jacob's blood went cold when he saw the guns in their hands and the desperate hunger on their faces. Road agents, drifters, men who'd been out in the storm too long and would do anything for shelter and supplies. Or worse. Well now, the first man said, water streaming from his hat brim. Looks like we found ourselves a nice warm cabin. That's real hospitable of you, friend. Jacob kept the rifle trained on them. Turn around and walk away. I've got nothing you want. The second man grinned, showing missing teeth. That's where you're wrong. We want plenty food, whiskey, money, and... His eyes flicked to the bedroom door. Whatever pretty thing you got hiding back there. Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger. Touch that door and I'll kill you both. You got 2 of us and 1 gun, the first man said reasonably. Now I don't want any trouble, friend. Just give us what we came for and we'll be on our way come morning. Jacob knew that was a lie. Men like this didn't leave witnesses. The next few seconds happened in a blur. The first man moved, going for Jacob with his knife. Jacob fired the crack of the rifle impossibly loud in the small cabin, and the man went down screaming, clutching his leg. The second man charged, and Jacob tried to chamber another round, but there wasn't time. They collided and a tangle of limbs crashed into the table. The rifle went flying. Jacob had fought in the war, had killed men with his hands when bullets ran out and those instincts came flooding back now. He drove his elbow into the man's face, felt bone crunch. The man howled, but didn't let go. Fingers scrabbling for Jacob's throat. They rolled across the floor, smashing into furniture, both fighting with the desperate strength of men who knew only one of them was walking away from this. Then the bedroom door flew open and Anna appeared with Clara's old pistol. "Get off him!" she screamed. The man on top of Jacob froze, looked up and laughed. "Little girl playing with a gun. That's adorable." "I'm not playing." Anna's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I've never shot anyone before, but I swear to God, I will put a bullet in you if you don't get off him right now." The man apparently saw something in her eyes that made him believe her because he slowly raised his hands and backed away. Jacob scrambled to his feet, grabbed his rifle from where it had fallen, and aimed it at the man's chest. "Out," Jacob said. "Both of you. Now." The first man was still on the floor, bleeding from his leg, but not dead. His companion helped him up, and together they stumbled toward the door. At the threshold, the second man turned back, his face twisted with hate. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is." Jacob's voice was cold as January. "You come back here, I'll bury you both out back with the cattle that died last winter. No one will ever find you. No one will ever care." The men disappeared into the storm. Jacob stood in the wreckage of his cabin, overturned furniture blood on the floorboards, the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the air, and felt his hands start to shake. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving nothing but the sick realization of how close they'd come to dying. Then Anna was there, wrapping her arms around him, and Jacob pulled her close without thinking, buried his face in her hair. She was trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. But she didn't let go, and neither did he. "You saved my life," Jacob said into her hair. "You saved mine first." Anna's voice was muffled against his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the lamplight, while the storm howled and their hearts slowly stopped racing. And Jacob realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, Anna had stopped being a stranger, stopped being Clara's ghost, stopped being a problem to be solved. She'd become someone he couldn't imagine losing. Slowly, carefully, Jacob pulled back just enough to look at her face. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, her cheeks flushed, her lips slightly parted as she caught her breath. He raised one hand, brushed a strand of wet hair back from her face, and saw her eyes widen. "Anna," he said, and her name on his lips felt like a prayer and a confession all at once. "Jacob." She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Fear and hope, and something else, something that made his heart stutter. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic or anything like the kisses he'd shared with Clara. It was desperate and hungry and full of 10 years of loneliness and grief and need. Anna made a small sound against his mouth. Surprise or protest or surrender, he couldn't tell, and then she was kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. They stumbled toward the bedroom, shedding clothes between kisses, hands fumbling with buttons and laces. Jacob's shirt hit the floor. Anna's dress followed. They fell onto the bed together in a tangle of limbs and heat and want, and Jacob's hands were in her hair on her skin, memorizing the feel of her like a drowning man memorizing air. And then he opened his eyes and saw Clara's photograph on the dresser. Clara smiling at the camera on their wedding day, so young and alive and trusting. Clara, who'd loved him and married him and died because he'd brought her to this God-forsaken place. Clara, whose sister he was about to betray. Jacob pulled away with a sound that was half curse, half sob. Anna cried out in protest, reaching for him, but he was already backing away, grabbing his shirt from the floor, his face twisted with shame and self-loathing. "No," he said. "No, we can't do this." Anna sat up, her hair wild around her shoulders, her eyes bright with tears. "Why not?" "Because you're Clara's sister, because you came here looking for family, and I'm taking advantage of you. You're 23 years old, for Christ's sake. You don't know what you want." "I know exactly what I want." Anna's voice was fierce. "I want you. I've wanted you since the first moment I saw you standing in that doorway looking at me like I was a ghost come back to life. I want you, Jacob Mercer. Not because you're my sister's husband, not because I'm grateful or lonely or desperate. Because you're a good man who's been punishing himself for 10 years for something that wasn't his fault. Because you make me feel safe and strong and like maybe I could build a life out here after all. Because when you look at me, I feel... Don't. Jacob's voice was rough. Don't say it. I feel alive, and Anna finished. And I think you feel it too. Jacob closed his eyes. Your sister is dead. Anna's voice broke. Clara is dead, Jacob, and I grieve for her, I do, but she's been gone for 10 years and she's never coming back. And I think if she were here, she'd want us to be happy. She'd want you to stop living like you died with her. She'd want me to stop being afraid of everything. She'd want us to have a chance. Jacob opened his eyes. Looked at Anna sitting in Clara's bed, wearing nothing but her chemise, her face fierce and vulnerable and heartbreakingly beautiful. And God help him, he wanted to believe her. Wanted to cross the room and take her in his arms and stop fighting the thing that had been building between them for 3 weeks. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not like this in the heat of fear and adrenaline with the storm still raging and the cabin still reeking of violence. If he did this, if he gave in to what he wanted, he needed to do it right. Needed to be sure they both knew what they were choosing. Get some sleep, Jacob said quietly. We'll talk in the morning. He turned and walked out of the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Anna didn't follow. Jacob spent the rest of the night sitting in his chair by the fire, listening to the storm, and trying not to think about the woman in the next room, trying not to think about the way she'd kissed him, the way her hands had felt on his skin, the way her eyes had looked when he'd pulled away. Trying not to think about the fact that somewhere in the past 3 weeks he'd fallen in love with his dead wife's sister, and he had no idea what the hell to do about it. Dawn came cold and gray, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the small hours. Jacob sat in his chair watching the light seep through the windows, his body aching from a sleepless night, his mind churning with thoughts he couldn't quiet. The cabin was silent except for the occasional pop and hiss of the dying fire, and he wondered if Anna was awake in the next room lying in Clara's bed, thinking about what had almost happened between them, what he'd stopped from happening. Jacob stood his joints protesting and moved to stoke the fire back to life. He was reaching for the kindling when he heard the bedroom door open. He didn't turn around, couldn't make himself face her yet. Just kept his hands busy with wood and tinder while his heart hammered against his ribs. Jacob, Anna's voice was quiet, steady. We need to talk about last night. Nothing to talk about. Jacob struck a match, watched the flame catch and spread. We got through the storm. Those men are gone. Everything's fine. Everything is not fine. Anna moved closer, and Jacob could feel her presence like a physical weight. You kissed me. We almost, and then you ran away like I was on fire. Jacob finally turned to face her. She was dressed in the same blue calico, her hair braided back from her face, and she looked tired but determined. Not angry, which somehow made it worse. He could have handled anger. Anger he understood. I shouldn't have done that, Jacob said. I was wrong. You were scared, I was scared, and things got confused. It won't happen again. Anna's jaw tightened. What if I want it to happen again? Anna. No, listen to me. She crossed the room until she was standing right in front of him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. I'm not a child, Jacob. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from her own choices. I know what I felt last night. I know what I want. And I think you know what you want too, even if you're too scared to admit it. Of course I'm scared. The words burst out of Jacob before he could stop them. You're Clara's sister. You're 23 years old. You've been here less than a month. What happens when you realize this life isn't what you thought it would be? What happens when you get sick of the isolation and the work, and you want to go back east where you belong? What happens when you leave Anna? Because people always leave. They die, or they get sick of me, or they realize I'm not worth staying for, and they leave. Anna's expression softened. I'm not going to leave. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She reached up, cupped his face in her work-roughened hands. I came here with nowhere else to go and nothing to lose. I've spent 3 weeks learning how to survive in this place, and it's hard and it hurts, and half the time I want to scream with frustration. But I'm still here, Jacob. I'm still choosing to be here. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Jacob closed his eyes, felt the warmth of her palms against his skin. I can't lose someone else. I can't do that again. Then don't push me away. Anna's voice was fierce. Don't make the choice for me. Let me stay. Let me be here with you. Let yourself be happy for once in your miserable, stubborn life. Jacob opened his eyes, looked down at this woman who'd walked into his cabin a month ago, and turned his carefully constructed loneliness inside out. This woman who looked like Clara, but wasn't Clara, who was braver and more stubborn than she had any right to be, who'd stood in a doorway with a gun in her shaking hands and saved his life without hesitation. This woman he'd fallen in love with despite every effort not to. Your sister's been dead 10 years, Jacob said slowly. But I've been talking to her ghost every day since she died. I need to let her go before we can... He couldn't finish the sentence. Anna nodded. Then let her go. I don't know how. Yes, you do. Anna dropped her hands, stepped back. You've been punishing yourself for a decade, Jacob. You stopped living when Clara died, but she wouldn't have wanted that. You know she wouldn't have. So stop using her memory as an excuse to stay locked in the past. Jacob felt something crack inside him at those words, because Anna was right. He'd been using grief like a shield, had wrapped himself in guilt and loneliness until they became his whole identity. He'd stopped being Jacob Mercer, husband and rancher and man with hopes and dreams, and become instead a monument to loss. It was time to tear that monument down. Jacob moved past Anna into the bedroom. She followed, standing in the doorway while he crossed to the dresser and picked up Clara's photograph. He stood there for a long moment looking at that young, smiling face, remembering the woman she'd been. Kind and gentle and brave in her own quiet way. A woman who'd loved him enough to leave everything she knew and follow him into the wilderness. A woman who would want him to be happy. I'm sorry, Jacob said to the photograph. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I let you die. But I can't keep living like I died with you. I can't keep punishing myself for surviving. His voice cracked. I need to let you go now, Clara. I need to live again. He set the photograph face down on the dresser, turned away from it, and found Anna watching him with tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Jacob crossed the room, pulled her into his arms, and held her while they both cried for the sister and wife they'd lost, for the 10 years of grief that had shaped them both, for the impossibly fragile hope of something new, beginning in the ruins of the old. When they finally pulled apart, Jacob kept his hands on Anna's shoulders, looked into her eyes, and said the words he'd been too afraid to speak the night before. I want you to stay, not just for a month, for as long as you'll have me. I want to teach you everything about this place. I want to watch you get stronger and braver and more yourself. He swallowed hard. I want to stop being alone. Anna smiled through her tears. Then stop. This time when Jacob kissed her, it was different. Not desperate or hungry or full of fear, but slow and sweet and promising, a beginning instead of an ending. Anna's arms came up around his neck, and Jacob lifted her against him, and for the first time in 10 years he let himself feel something other than grief. He let himself feel joy. They broke apart reluctantly, and Jacob rested his forehead against Anna's, both of them breathing hard. We should take this slow, he said. We should stop talking. Anna interrupted and kissed him again. Jacob laughed against her mouth, a sound that felt rusty and strange and wonderful. Yes, ma'am. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of discovery and wonder. They stayed in the bedroom, learning the shape of each other, the taste and touch and texture of new intimacy. Jacob was careful with her, knowing she was young and likely inexperienced, but Anna was fearless in a way that stole his breath, her curiosity and desire matching his own. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Clara's bed, and for the first time it didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like coming home. Tell me about your life before you came here, Jacob said, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Anna's shoulder. I know your aunt raised you after your parents died. What else? Anna was quiet for a moment, her head pillowed on his chest. There's not much to tell. My parents died of typhoid fever when I was 8. Clara was 18, already engaged to you. Our aunt took me in, not out of love, I don't think, but because it was expected. She raised me to be a proper lady, taught me piano and French and how to pour tea, told me I'd marry well and restore the family fortune. She laughed bitterly. Turns out the family fortune never existed. My aunt was living on credit and lies. When she died, the creditors came for everything. I had to sell my mother's jewelry just to buy the train ticket west. Jacob's arm tightened around her. I'm sorry. Don't be. If my aunt hadn't died, I never would have found Clara's letters. Never would have known I had family out here. Never would have met you. Anna tilted her head to look up at him. So maybe it all happened the way it was supposed to. You believe in fate. I believe in making the best of what you're given. Anna smiled. And I was given you, so I must be doing something right. Jacob kissed the top of her head, felt something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest. Hope, he realized. For the first time in a decade, he was allowing himself to hope for a future that held more than just survival. They stayed in bed until the sun was high, and then reluctantly dressed and emerged to face the day. The cabin was a mess from the fight the night before, overturned furniture blood still staining the floorboards, the front door hanging crooked on its hinges where the intruders had kicked it in. Hell, Jacob muttered, surveying the damage. Anna rolled up her sleeves. Well, let's get to work then. They spent the afternoon putting the cabin back together. Jacob repaired the door while Anna scrubbed blood from the floor, both of them working in comfortable silence. It felt domestic and ordinary and impossibly precious, this simple act of building a home together, of taking something broken and making it whole again. By evening, the cabin was clean and the door was rehung, and they sat down to a dinner of venison stew that Anna had made without burning. Jacob ate 3 bowls and told her it was the best thing he'd tasted in years, and the smile she gave him was bright enough to light up the whole valley. I've been thinking, Anna said as they were washing up, about those men last night. What if they come back? They won't. Jacob's voice was flat with certainty. I put enough fear in them that they'll ride as far from here as their horses can carry them. But what if there are others? What if... Anna bit her lip. Jacob, we're so isolated out here. If something happened, if you got hurt or sick, I wouldn't even know how to get help. Jacob set down the plate he was drying. You're right. Winter's coming and we need supplies from town anyway. Tomorrow we'll ride into Rollins. I'll introduce you around, make sure people know you're here. That way if there's ever trouble, you'll know who to go to. Anna nodded, looking relieved. And maybe while we're there we could... She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. Could what? Nothing. Never mind. Jacob caught her hand, turned her to face him. Anna, what were you going to say? Anna took a deep breath. Maybe while we're in town we could talk to the preacher. Jacob's heart stopped. The preacher. I know it's fast. I know we've only really known each other a month. But Jacob, I don't care about taking things slow or doing things proper. I know what I want. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life here with you. I want... She faltered, then pushed forward. I want to be your wife. Jacob stared at her, his mind reeling. A month ago, he'd been alone, convinced he'd spend the rest of his life as a widower, and now this woman was standing in his cabin asking to marry him. It was too fast, too sudden, too right. Yes, Jacob said. Anna's eyes went wide. Yes, yes. Jacob pulled her close, cupped her face in his hands. I know it's fast. I know people will talk. I know there's 100 reasons we should wait, but I've wasted 10 years, Anna. I'm not wasting another day. If you want to marry me, then let's get married. Anna let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around his neck. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Jacob kissed her, felt her smile against his mouth. We'll ride into town, talk to the preacher, and you can be Mrs. Mercer by sunset. Mrs. Mercer, Anna repeated, testing out the name. That's going to take some getting used to. You've got the rest of your life to get used to it. They stayed up late that night talking about the future in a way Jacob hadn't allowed himself to talk in a decade. Anna wanted to expand the vegetable garden, maybe get some pigs. Jacob wanted to buy more cattle, build up the herd. They talked about hiring help in the spring, about maybe building an addition onto the cabin, about all the small and large ways they'd make this place theirs together. And when they finally went to bed, Jacob didn't sleep in the chair by the fire. He slept in the bedroom with Anna warm and solid beside him, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't dream of ghosts. The ride into Rollins the next morning took 3 hours. Jacob saddled Rosie for Anna, who'd gotten good enough at riding that she only looked mildly terrified instead of completely panicked. They rode side by side through country that was starting to show the first signs of autumn, golden aspens on the hillsides, frost on the morning grass, geese flying south in ragged V formations. "It's beautiful," Anna said, her breath misting in the cold air. "I never knew it could be this beautiful." Jacob looked at the land he'd lived on for 15 years, seeing it fresh through her eyes. She was right. It was beautiful. Harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful in the way wild things always were. Rollins was a railroad town, rough and loud and full of cowboys and miners, and all the businesses that served them. Jacob rarely came here, preferring to order supplies by mail and avoid people as much as possible, but Anna stared at everything with wide eyes, the saloons and storefronts, the railroad depot, the mix of languages and accents that made up frontier society. They tied their horses outside the general store, and Jacob helped Anna down from the saddle. She stumbled slightly, her legs stiff from the ride, and Jacob caught her waist to steady her. The moment his hands touched her, Anna looked up at him and smiled, and Jacob felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." The general store was crowded with Saturday shoppers, and Jacob felt their eyes on him the moment he walked in. He knew what they saw: Jacob Mercer, the hermit rancher, the tragic widower who'd been living alone for a decade. And now here he was, with a young woman on his arm, both of them looking flushed and happy in a way that would set tongues wagging for weeks. Jacob didn't care. "Mr. Mercer," the store owner, a portly man named Henderson, came bustling over. "Haven't seen you in months. What brings you to town?" "Need supplies," Jacob said. "And I wanted to introduce my fiancée, Anna Whitmore. This is Tom Henderson." Henderson's eyes went comically wide. "Fiancée? Well, I'll be congratulations, Mr. Mercer. Miss Whitmore, it's a pleasure." He shook Anna's hand enthusiastically. "When's the wedding?" "Today," Anna said, and Jacob felt a fierce pride at the certainty in her voice. "We're going to talk to the preacher after we finish here." Word spread through the store like wildfire. Within minutes, half the town seemed to know that Jacob Mercer was getting married, and people Jacob barely knew were clapping him on the back and congratulating Anna and asking questions neither of them wanted to answer about how they'd met and how long they'd known each other, and wasn't it all rather sudden? Jacob gritted his teeth and endured it, knowing this was the price of rejoining society after 10 years of isolation. Beside him, Anna handled the attention with grace, smiling and deflecting intrusive questions and generally charming everyone she spoke to. They bought flour and sugar and coffee, salt pork and ammunition, a new dress for Anna that wasn't one of Clara's hand-me-downs. Jacob paid with coins he'd been hoarding for years and told Henderson to deliver everything to the ranch next week. Then they walked to the church. The preacher was a young man named Reverend Collins, new to town and eager to prove himself. He listened to their request with raised eyebrows, but didn't ask difficult questions, just pulled out his Bible and asked if they had witnesses. "I'll find some, Jacob said, and went back out to the street. He found 2 cowboys he vaguely recognized from cattle drives, promised them each $1, and dragged them into the church. They stood awkwardly in the back pew while Reverend Collins performed the ceremony, stumbling through the traditional words, while Jacob and Anna repeated their vows. Jacob had done this before 15 years ago with Clara. That wedding had been a big affair in Denver, with Clara's aunt and all her society friends in attendance, with a white dress and flowers and a reception that lasted until dawn. This wedding was nothing like that, quick and simple and witnessed by strangers, performed in a dusty frontier church that smelled of old wood and tallow candles. But when Jacob slipped a plain gold band on Anna's finger, bought hastily from the general store 10 minutes earlier, and kissed her to seal their marriage, he felt more married than he ever had before. Because this time he was choosing it, not out of obligation or social pressure, or because it was expected, but because he wanted this woman beside him for whatever time they had left in this world. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Collins said, and Jacob kissed Anna again, deeper this time, not caring that they had an audience. When they broke apart, Anna was smiling so wide her face looked like it might split in half. "Mrs. Mercer," she said. I'm Mrs. Mercer now. Yes, you are. Jacob kept his arm around her waist as they walked out of the church into the afternoon sunlight. How does it feel? Terrifying, Anna admitted, and wonderful, and like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. They started the ride home as the sun was dropping toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Jacob set an easy pace, not wanting to push the horses, and Anna rode beside him with her new wedding ring catching the light. Thank you, Anna said suddenly. Jacob looked at her. For what? For letting me stay, for giving me a chance, for Anna's voice caught. For seeing me as more than just Clara's sister, for seeing me as Anna. How could I not? Jacob reached across the space between their horses, took her hand in his. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You came west with nothing learned. Everything I threw at you saved my life without hesitation. You're not Clara's shadow, Anna. You're your own light. Anna's eyes shimmered with tears. I love you, Jacob Mercer. The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. He pulled his horse to a stop, and Anna did the same. Both of them sitting there on the trail with the sun setting around them. Jacob looked at his new wife, this woman who'd walked into his cabin a month ago and changed everything, and felt his heart crack open with an emotion so fierce it stole his breath. I love you too, he said. God help me, I love you too. They dismounted right there on the trail, let the horses graze while they held each other in the fading light. And when they finally pulled apart and continued the ride home, Jacob felt lighter than he had in a decade. The cabin came into view as dusk was settling over the valley. Smoke rose from the chimney Jacob had banked the fire before they left, and it had clearly kept burning, and lamplight glowed warm in the windows. It looked like home, not the monument to loss it had been for 10 years, but a real home where real people lived and loved and built a life together. Jacob helped Anna down from her horse, and before she could step away, he swept her up in his arms. Anna let out a startled laugh, wrapping her arms around his neck. What are you doing? Carrying my wife over the threshold, Jacob said. Isn't that the tradition? I think the tradition is for new houses, not cabins you've been living in for 15 years. I don't care. Jacob kicked the door open, carried Anna inside, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. New wife, new start, new traditions. Anna smiled up at him, her eyes bright in the firelight. I like the sound of that. Jacob kissed her slow and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. Gratitude and desire and love and hope and all the complicated emotions he'd spent a decade trying not to feel. Anna kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressed close against his. They made love that night in the bedroom, and it was different from the desperate urgency of the night before. This time they took it slow, learning each other properly, building pleasure gradually until it crested and broke like a wave. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness. Anna's head on Jacob's chest, his arms wrapped around her like he could keep the whole world at bay. Tell me about the blizzard, Anna said suddenly. Tell me what really happened. Jacob tensed. I already told you. No, you told me Clara died. But you didn't tell me what happened to you. You didn't tell me how you survived. Anna propped herself up on one elbow, looked down at him in the darkness. I need to know, Jacob. I need to understand what you went through. Jacob closed his eyes, felt the memories rising like floodwater. After Clara died, I wrapped her in blankets. The ground was frozen too hard to dig a grave, so I put her in the smokehouse to keep her preserved until the thaw. Then I went back inside and I drank every drop of whiskey in the cabin. I wanted to die too. Thought about going out into the storm, letting it take me. But I was too much of a coward. That's not cowardice, Anna said softly. That's survival. Felt like cowardice. Jacob opened his eyes, stared at the ceiling he couldn't see in the darkness. The storm lasted 3 more days. I stayed drunk the whole time. When it finally cleared, I dug her grave. Took me 2 days because the ground was like iron. I buried her, said some words I don't remember, and then He swallowed hard. I locked myself in this cabin for 2 weeks, didn't eat, barely drank water, just sat in that chair by the fire and waited to die. But you didn't die? No. Henderson came out looking for me. He'd heard about Clara, wanted to check on me. found me half-starved and out of my mind. He stayed for a week, forced me to eat, kept me from doing something stupid. And eventually I decided to keep living. Not because I wanted to, but because dying felt like admitting defeat. So I survived, day by day, year by year, until surviving was all I knew how to do. Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're not just surviving anymore, Jacob. You're living, and I'm going to make sure you keep living every day for the rest of our lives." Jacob pulled her down, kissed her fierce and hard. "I know you will." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Jacob's last thought before darkness took him was that for the first time since Clara died, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The next weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Anna threw herself into learning everything about ranch life with the same stubborn determination she'd shown from the beginning. Jacob taught her to shoot properly. Her aim improved until she could hit a tin can 9 times out of 10. He taught her to ride well enough that she could help him check the fence lines and herd the cattle. He taught her to preserve meat and churn butter and make bread that didn't come out hard as stone. In return, Anna taught Jacob how to laugh again, how to see joy in small things. The first snow of winter, a successful batch of butter, the way the morning light caught in her hair when she was feeding the chickens. She brought music back to the cabin singing while she worked, and even convinced Jacob to dance with her one night by the fire, both of them stumbling through steps neither quite remembered. The supplies Henderson delivered included letters, 3 of them forwarded from Anna's old address in Denver. She read them by lamplight, her face going pale, and when Jacob asked what was wrong, she handed him the first letter without a word. It was from a lawyer informing Anna that her aunt's creditors were pursuing her for the outstanding debts. The amount made Jacob whistle low, $5,000 a fortune by any measure. "They can't make you pay your aunt's debts," Jacob said. "They can try." Anna's voice was tight. "The lawyer says because I was living with her when she died, they might be able to argue I'm responsible. We'll fight it." "With what money, Jacob?" Anna looked at him with tired eyes. "We barely have enough to get through winter. If they come after us, we'll lose everything." Jacob set the letter down, pulled Anna into his arms. "Then we'll figure something out. We'll sell cattle if we have to, or I'll hire on for spring roundup with one of the big outfits. But we're not losing this ranch, Anna. This is our home now. I won't let anyone take it from us." Anna buried her face against his chest. "I'm sorry. I should have told you about the debts before we got married. I should have—" "Stop." Jacob tilted her chin up, made her look at him. "You did tell me you had nothing. That was enough. We'll handle this together the way we handle everything. All right?" Anna nodded, but Jacob could see the fear in her eyes. And he understood it because he was afraid too. Afraid that just when he'd finally found something good, something worth living for, it was going to be ripped away. But he'd survived the war and the frontier and 10 years of grief. He could survive this too. They wrote back to the lawyer explaining that Anna had moved west and married, that she had no assets and no ability to pay her aunt's debts. They sent the letter and tried not to think about what might come back. Winter arrived in earnest a week later, bringing snow that piled 3 feet deep and temperatures that dropped below 0. Jacob and Anna settled into the rhythms of winter ranch life, feeding animals, hauling water, keeping the fire going, telling stories to pass the long, dark evenings. And in the cold and isolation, with the wind howling outside and the snow burying the world in white silence, Jacob found something he thought he'd lost forever. He found peace. The peace lasted exactly 6 weeks. Jacob was in the barn repairing a broken harness when he heard the sound of horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast. His hands stilled on the leather, every instinct honed by years on the frontier screaming danger. He moved to the barn door, peered out through the gap, and felt his blood turn to ice. 4 riders were coming up the valley road, and even from a distance, Jacob could see they weren't cowboys or neighbors. They wore suits under their heavy coats, rode expensive horses, and had the look of men who were used to getting what they came for. Debt collectors. Jacob's jaw clenched. He'd known this was coming, had felt it hanging over them like a storm cloud for weeks, but he'd hoped they'd have more time. Hoped the winter would keep them away, that they'd give up and move on to easier targets. But here they were, and Anna was in the cabin alone, probably unaware of the approaching threat. Jacob sprinted across the snow-covered yard, burst through the cabin door. Anna looked up from where she was kneading bread dough, her hands white with flour, surprise and concern, flashing across her face at his expression. "Riders coming," Jacob said shortly. "4 of them, lawyers or debt collectors, I'd wager." The color drained from Anna's face. "Already? But we only sent the letter 2 weeks ago." "Doesn't matter, they're here." Jacob grabbed his rifle from over the door, checked that it was loaded. "Stay inside. Let me handle this." "Jacob, you can't just shoot them." "I'm not planning to shoot them unless they give me reason." Jacob moved back to the door, positioned himself on the porch, where he could see the approaching riders. "But I'm not letting them intimidate you either." Anna came to stand beside him despite his order to stay inside, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. Jacob wanted to send her back to protect her from whatever was coming, but he also knew that stubborn set to her jaw. She wasn't going anywhere. The riders reined in at the bottom of the porch steps. The man in front was tall and thin with a sharp face and calculating eyes. He dismounted with the careful movements of someone unused to long rides, adjusted his hat, and looked up at Jacob and Anna with an expression that managed to be both professional and threatening. "Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Mercer." His voice was cultured Eastern. "My name is Harrison Blackwell. I'm a representative of the Boston Mercantile Trust. I'm here regarding outstanding debts owed by the estate of Margaret Whitmore." "My wife doesn't owe you anything," Jacob said flatly. "We already wrote to your lawyers. Anna wasn't responsible for her aunt's debts." Blackwell smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm afraid the law sees it differently, Mr. Mercer. Miss Whitmore. Excuse me, Mrs." Mercer was living in her aunt's household at the time of death. Under common law, she inherited not just any assets, but also any outstanding liabilities. "That's not how it works, and you know it," Anna said. Her voice was steady despite the tremor Jacob could feel running through her. "I was a dependent, not an heir. I inherited nothing because there was nothing to inherit. Nevertheless, the debt exists, $5,000 plus interest accruing at 8% annually." Blackwell pulled a document from his coat pocket, held it up. "I have a court order authorizing seizure of assets to satisfy the debt. That includes this property, all livestock, and any personal possessions of value." Jacob's finger tightened on the rifle. "Get off my land." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Mercer. I have the authority." "I don't give a damn what authority you think you have. This is my property bought and paid for 15 years ago. My wife's aunt never set foot here, never had any claim to it. You try to take it, you'll be doing it over my dead body." The 3 men behind Blackwell shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their coats. Jacob saw the gesture, understood what it meant. These weren't just lawyers. They were hired muscle brought along in case the debtors proved difficult. "Let's not be hasty," Blackwell said smoothly. "I understand this is distressing, but the debt is real, Mr. Mercer, and it must be satisfied. Now we can do this the easy way. You sign over the deed to this property, we take possession, and you and your wife are free to leave with whatever personal items you can carry. Or we can do this the hard way, which involves the territorial marshal and a lot of unpleasantness for everyone involved." "There's a third way," Jacob said. "You turn around, ride back to Boston, and tell your employers that if they come after my wife again, I'll make them regret it." Blackwell's smile faded. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Mercer?" "I'm making you a promise." The tension stretched tight as a wire. Jacob could feel Anna trembling beside him, could see the calculations running behind Blackwell's eyes as he weighed his options. The 3 hired men had their hands inside their coats, now clearly armed, clearly willing to use violence if their employer gave the word. Then Anna stepped forward, moving in front of Jacob despite his muttered curse. "Mr. Blackwell, please, can we discuss this reasonably? Perhaps we could work out a payment plan. We don't have $5,000, but we could pay something each month. It would take years, but the trust has no interest in a payment plan, Mrs. Mercer. They want immediate satisfaction of the debt." Blackwell's voice softened slightly as if he was almost sympathetic. "I understand your position. Truly I do. But I have my orders. Either you surrender the property voluntarily or I return with the marshal and we take it by force. Those are your only options." Jacob felt rage burning in his chest, hot and fierce. After everything they'd survived, after finally finding happiness, some Boston banker was going to take it all away over a debt Anna didn't even owe. It was wrong, unjust, and Jacob had half a mind to start shooting and damn the consequences. But Anna's hand on his arm stopped him. She was looking at Blackwell with an expression Jacob had never seen before, calculating, shrewd, and utterly fearless. "How much authority do you have, Mr. Blackwell?" Anna asked. Blackwell blinked. "I'm sorry. Can you negotiate on behalf of the trust? Can you accept alternate forms of payment, or are you just here to seize property?" "I have some discretionary authority," Blackwell admitted cautiously. "Why?" "Because I have something that might interest your employers more than this ranch." Anna's voice was steady now, confident. "My aunt's debts were accrued through investments in railroad stock, correct? The Northern Pacific Railway. Among other ventures, yes. And those stocks are now worthless because the Northern Pacific went bankrupt 2 years ago." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "What's your point, Mrs. Mercer?" "My point is that my aunt wasn't just gambling with the Boston Mercantile Trust's money. She had insider information about railroad routes, land acquisitions, political connections. Before she died, she kept detailed records of everything she learned. Names, dates, payments made to territorial officials to secure right-of-way. Very valuable information, Mr. Blackwell. The kind of information that could help the trust recover some of their losses by making better investments in the future." Jacob stared at Anna, completely blindsided. She'd never mentioned any of this. Blackwell was staring too, his expression shifting from dismissive to intensely interested. "You have these records?" Blackwell asked. "I have them. Boxes full of them stored safely." Anna lifted her chin. "I'll trade them for forgiveness of the debt. Complete forgiveness, legally documented and binding. You get information worth far more than $5,000, and we keep our home. Everyone wins." "I'd need to see these records first. Verify their authenticity." "Of course. Give me 3 days to retrieve them from where they're stored. Come back on Friday, we'll show you everything, and if you're satisfied, we can finalize the arrangement." Blackwell was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing the offer. Finally, he nodded. 3 days, Mrs. Mercer. But understand if these records don't exist, or if they're not as valuable as you claim, the offer is void, and we proceed with seizure. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear." Blackwell remounted his horse, and the 4 men turned and rode back down the valley. Jacob and Anna stood on the porch watching them go, neither speaking until the riders had disappeared from sight. Then Jacob turned to Anna, grabbed her shoulders. "What the hell was that? What records? What are you talking about?" Anna's confidence crumbled, her face going pale. "I have no idea. I made it all up." "You what?" "I had to say something. They were going to take everything." Anna pulled away from him, paced across the porch. "My aunt kept journals, but they were just society gossip and complaints about her health. There's nothing about railroads or investments or insider information. I just said the first thing that came into my head that might buy us time." Jacob felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. "Anna, when they come back and realize you lied, they're going to be furious. They'll seize everything out of spite." "I know." Anna's voice broke. "I know. And I'm sorry. But what was I supposed to do? Let them take our home without a fight? I couldn't do that, Jacob. I couldn't just give up." Jacob wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at her for lying, for making things worse, for giving them 3 days of false hope before everything came crashing down. But when he looked at Anna's face, terrified and defiant and fighting tears, he couldn't find it in himself to blame her. She'd been trying to protect them the only way she knew how. "All right," Jacob said quietly. "All right. We've got 3 days. Let's not waste them panicking. What are we going to do?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure something out." Jacob pulled Anna into his arms, felt her shaking against him. "We always do." They spent that night going through every box and trunk in the cabin, searching desperately through Anna's meager possessions for anything that might support her lie. Clara's old letters, Anna's aunt's journals, miscellaneous papers and documents. Nothing useful, nothing that would satisfy Blackwell's demand. By dawn they were exhausted and no closer to a solution. "We could run," Anna said as they sat at the table drinking coffee neither of them wanted. "Pack up, head to California or Oregon, start over somewhere new." "They'd follow us. And even if they didn't, we'd be running for the rest of our lives, always looking over our shoulders." Jacob shook his head. "I won't live like that. I already spent 10 years hiding from the world. I'm done running. Then what do we do? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, turning possibilities over in his mind. Then an idea started to form, dangerous, probably illegal, but possibly their only chance. Your aunt's journals, the ones you said were just gossip. Where are they? In that trunk by the door. Why? Jacob stood retrieved the journals, spread them out on the table. There were 5 of them, leather-bound and filled with cramped handwriting. He flipped through them quickly, scanning the contents. Society gossip, like Anna had said. Details about dinner parties and engagements, complaints about servants and creditors. Nothing valuable, but maybe they could make them valuable. We're going to create the records you promised, Jacob said. Anna looked at him like he'd lost his mind. How? We forge them. Use your aunt's journals as a base add information about railroads and investments. Make it look authentic. Jacob met her eyes. It's fraud. If we get caught, we could go to prison. But it might be our only chance. Jacob, I can't ask you to do that. This is my problem, not yours. You're my wife. Your problems are my problems. Jacob reached across the table, took her hand. I'm not losing you, Anna. I'm not losing this life we're building. If we have to break the law to keep it, then that's what we'll do. Anna was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands. Then she looked up, her jaw set with determination. Tell me what to do. They worked for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and determination. Jacob rode into Rollins and bought newspapers dating back 5 years, looking for information about railroad investments and territorial politics. Anna studied her aunt's handwriting, practiced mimicking it until she could forge entries that looked authentic. Together, they created a narrative, a story about Margaret Whitmore's investments in the Northern Pacific, the inside information she'd gathered, the bribes and political machinations she'd witnessed. It was a work of fiction, but it was a convincing one. By Friday morning, they had 50 pages of forged journal entries carefully aged with tea stains and worn edges. They'd intersperse them throughout the original journals so they'd be harder to identify as fake. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough to fool someone who didn't look too closely. It had to be enough. Blackwell arrived at noon with the same 3 hired men. This time, Jacob didn't greet them with a rifle, just opened the door and invited them inside with a courtesy that felt like swallowing broken glass. The records, Blackwell said without preamble. Anna brought out the journals, laid them on the table. My aunt kept everything. Dates, names, amounts paid in bribes to secure railway routes, information about which territorial officials could be bought, which investors were being fed false information. It's all here. Blackwell sat down, pulled the journals toward him, and began reading. Jacob and Anna stood nearby, trying to look calm while their hearts hammered against their ribs. Every time Blackwell turned a page, Jacob expected him to stand up and denounce them as frauds. Every time he paused to study an entry more closely, Jacob prepared himself for the worst. But Blackwell just kept reading, his expression growing more interested with each page. This is remarkable, Blackwell said finally. If this information is accurate, the trust could use it to pursue legal action against the Northern Pacific executives, might recover a significant portion of the lost investment. He looked up at Anna. Your aunt was keeping these as insurance. She was paranoid about being cheated, Anna said, which was at least partly true. She documented everything just in case she needed leverage. Blackwell nodded slowly, clearly believing it. This is worth far more than $5,000, Mrs. Mercer. The trust will be very pleased. He pulled out another document, set it on the table. This is a release of debt acknowledging full satisfaction of all outstanding obligations. Sign here and we're done. Anna's hand trembled as she signed. Jacob added his signature as witness, and just like that, it was over. The debt was forgiven. The ranch was safe. Blackwell gathered up the journals, stood, shook hands with both of them. Pleasure doing business with you. I'll let the trust know the matter is resolved. The 4 men mounted their horses and rode away, taking the forged journals with them. Jacob and Anna stood on the porch watching them go, neither speaking, barely breathing, until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then Anna's legs gave out. Jacob caught her before she hit the ground, eased her down to sit on the porch steps. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and Jacob realized he was shaking too, the adrenaline and fear of the past 3 days finally catching up with them both. We did it, Anna whispered. We actually did it. We committed fraud against a Boston banking trust, Jacob said. If they ever figure out those journals are fake, we're going to hang. Then we better hope they never figure it out. Jacob laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. Hope, yeah, that's a solid plan. That's a solid... They sat there on the porch for a long time, holding each other while the winter sun climbed higher and the world slowly came back into focus. The chickens clucked in their coop, the cows lowed in the barn. The wind whispered through the bare aspens on the hillside. Everything was exactly the same as it had been an hour ago, except now they were safe. And they were criminals. No regrets, Jacob asked quietly. Anna turned to look at him, her eyes fierce. Not a single one. They tried to take our home over a debt I didn't owe. As far as I'm concerned, they got what they deserved. Jacob kissed her hard and grateful and full of a complicated tangle of emotions he didn't have words for. When they broke apart, Anna was smiling. Come on, she said, standing and pulling him to his feet. We've got a ranch to run, and I'm making stew for dinner, so you better work up an appetite. Life returned to normal after that, or as normal as it could be for two people who'd just committed a federal crime. Jacob threw himself back into ranch work, repairing winter damage and preparing for spring. Anna continued to improve her skills, growing more confident and capable with each passing day. The forged journals hung over them like a sword, but as weeks passed without any word from Boston, they began to relax. Maybe they'd actually gotten away with it. Spring came early that year, the snow melting fast and turning the valley into a sea of mud. Jacob hired two cowboys, young men named Tom and Charlie, who'd worked cattle drives and were looking for steady employment to help with the spring roundup. Having other people around again felt strange after months of isolation, but Jacob found he didn't mind it as much as he'd expected. Tom and Charlie were good workers, respectful of Anna, and smart enough not to ask questions about Jacob's past. Anna bloomed in the spring warmth like the wildflowers that covered the hillsides. She'd put on weight muscle from hard work, and her face had lost the pale, refined look of city living. She looked healthy, strong, beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with confidence and capability. One night in late April, Anna came to Jacob as he was unsaddling his horse after a long day checking fence lines. She had an expression on her face he couldn't quite read, nervous and excited and scared all at once. "We need to talk," she said. Jacob's stomach dropped. Those 4 words had never meant anything good. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think anything's wrong. Anna took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant, Jacob." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't process them, couldn't make sense of what she was saying. Pregnant, a baby, a child. "Are you sure?" His voice came out hoarse. "Pretty sure. I've missed 2 courses and I've been sick every morning for a week. I know the signs." Anna twisted her hands together. "I know we never talked about children. I know this might not be what you want. But Jacob crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulled her into his arms, buried his face in her hair. A baby. He was going to be a father. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "It's what I want," he said fiercely. "God, Anna, it's exactly what I want." Anna pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "Really? Really?" Jacob cupped her face in his hands, kissed her with all the love and hope and terror churning in his chest. "We're going to have a baby." They told Tom and Charlie the next day, swore them to secrecy until Anna was further along. Both men congratulated them enthusiastically, and that night they celebrated with whiskey and stories around the fire. Jacob watched Anna laughing at something Tom said, her hand resting unconsciously on her still flat belly, and felt his heart swell with a feeling he thought he'd never experience again. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. But happiness on the frontier was always temporary, always fragile, always one disaster away from shattering into pieces. The disaster came on a Monday morning in early May. Jacob was in the barn showing Charlie how to treat a horse's split hoof when he heard Tom shout from the yard. He dropped his tools and ran outside to find Tom pointing toward the ridge, his face pale with shock. Smoke was rising from the south pasture. A lot of smoke. "Fire," Tom said unnecessarily. Jacob's blood turned to ice. Prairie fire was every rancher's nightmare, unstoppable, unpredictable, capable of destroying everything in its path. He'd seen fires burn for weeks, consuming thousands of acres, killing livestock and people with equal indifference. "Get the horses," Jacob ordered. "Anna, you stay here. Tom, Charlie, you're with me." "The hell I'm staying here," Anna said. She was already moving toward the barn, her jaw set with that stubborn determination Jacob knew better than to argue with. They saddled horses and rode hard toward the smoke. As they crested the ridge, Jacob's worst fears were confirmed. The south pasture was burning flames racing through the dry grass, driven by a wind that was picking up speed. A wall of fire, at least a quarter-mile wide, moving steadily north toward the ranch buildings. "How did this start?" Charlie yelled over the roar of the flames. "Doesn't matter." Jacob was already assessing their options, all of them bad. They didn't have enough people to create an effective firebreak. The wind was too strong to risk a backburn. Their only hope was to evacuate the livestock and hope the fire burned itself out before reaching the cabin. "Tom, Charlie, get the cattle out of the north pasture, drive them toward the river. Anna, you're coming with me. We need to save what we can from the cabin." They split up, Tom and Charlie racing north while Jacob and Anna turned their horses back toward home. The ride took 15 minutes that felt like hours, and by the time they reached the cabin, Jacob could see the flames clearly from the porch, a line of orange and red marching steadily closer. They had maybe an hour before the fire reached them. They worked with desperate speed, loading a wagon with everything they could carry: clothes, food, tools, Clara's photographs, Anna's journals. The livestock were already panicking, the horses screaming in their stalls, the cows bellowing in terror. Jacob got them loaded into a makeshift corral by the river while Anna continued packing. "That's enough," Jacob shouted. "We need to go. Just one more thing." Anna disappeared into the cabin. Jacob cursed and followed her inside. Anna was in the bedroom, frantically searching through drawers. "What are you doing?" "The marriage certificate. I can't find the marriage certificate." "Anna, we don't have time. It's the only proof we're married. If something happens, if we get separated, I need—" Her voice broke. "I need to be able to prove I'm your wife." Jacob found the document in a box on the dresser, grabbed it, grabbed Anna's arm. "We're going, now." They ran out of the cabin just as the fire reached the southern edge of their property. The heat was intense, even from 100 yards away, and Jacob could hear the roar of the flames consuming everything in their path. They threw the last of their possessions into the wagon, hitched the horses, and drove toward the river where Tom and Charlie were waiting with the cattle. Behind them, the cabin Jacob's home for 15 years, the place where he'd loved Clara and grieved her, and found Anna disappeared into a wall of fire. They spent that night on the far side of the river, watching their entire world burn. The fire raged until dawn, consuming the cabin, the barn, the corrals, the fences, everything they'd built and worked for. By morning, nothing was left but ash and smoke and the blackened skeletons of buildings. Jacob stood at the river's edge, staring at the devastation, feeling numb. Everything was gone. Years of work memories of Clara, the home he'd shared with Anna, reduced to nothing in the space of a few hours. Anna came to stand beside him, slipped her hand into his. She'd been crying, he could tell from her swollen eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "We can rebuild." Jacob almost laughed. "With what? We've got nothing left. No cabin, no barn, no supplies. We don't even have enough money to buy lumber. We have each other. We have our lives. We have this land." Anna squeezed his hand. "And we have a baby coming who's going to need a home. So we rebuild Jacob. We start over. Just like I did when I came here with nothing. Just like you did after Clara died. We keep going." Jacob looked at his wife, this woman who'd survived losing everything twice now, who was pregnant and exhausted and standing in the ruins of her home and still found the strength to talk about rebuilding. He thought about the baby growing inside her, about the life they were creating together, about how Clara would have told him the same thing Anna was saying now. Keep going. Keep living. Don't let the fire win. "All right," Jacob said quietly. "We rebuild." Tom and Charlie offered to stay and help, even though Jacob couldn't pay them much. The four of them spent the next week clearing the burned wreckage and planning the new cabin. It would be smaller than the old one, at least at first. They'd have to build it themselves from timber cut on the property, without money to hire proper carpenters or buy fancy materials. But it would be theirs. They slept in the wagon for 2 weeks while they worked from dawn to dusk, cutting trees and shaping logs. Anna helped as much as Jacob would allow. which wasn't much given her condition, but she insisted on cooking for the men and organizing the work. She was the heart of the operation, keeping spirits up when the work seemed impossible, reminding them all what they were building toward. By the end of May, they had the frame of the new cabin up. It was smaller than the old one, rougher, but solid. Jacob stood back looking at it one evening as the sun was setting and felt something shift in his chest. The old cabin had been Clara's home. This new one would be Anna's, and maybe that was how it was supposed to be. "It's perfect," Anna said, coming to slip her arm through his. Her belly was just starting to show now, a small swell beneath her dress. "It's barely a shelter," Jacob said, "but it'll do until we can do better." "It's perfect because we built it together." Anna rested her head on his shoulder. "Because it's ours from the ground up. No ghosts, no past, just us and our future." Jacob kissed the top of her head, felt his heart settle into a rhythm it hadn't found in the old cabin. She was right. This was a fresh start, a new beginning built from the ashes of the old. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what they both needed. The cabin was finished by mid-June, just as the summer heat settled over the valley like a blanket. It wasn't much to look at: one main room with a sleeping alcove, a stone fireplace Jacob had built from river rocks windows, covered with oiled paper until they could afford real glass. But it had a solid roof and tight walls, and when Anna swept the floor and hung curtains she'd sewn from flour sacks, it started to feel like home. Tom and Charlie moved their bedrolls into the barn they'd rebuilt, smaller than the original but functional. The four of them fell into a routine, the men working cattle and fence lines during the day, while Anna tended the garden she'd planted in the ash-enriched soil where the old cabin had stood. She said the vegetables would grow better there, nourished by what had been lost. And Jacob couldn't argue with the poetry of it, even if it made his chest ache to watch her work in that spot. Anna's pregnancy progressed through the summer heat. She grew rounder, moved slower, complained about her back and her swollen feet, but never stopped working. Jacob tried to make her rest, but she was as stubborn pregnant as she'd been when she first arrived, insisting she could still collect eggs and churn butter and cook meals for 4 hungry men. "The baby's not made of glass," she told Jacob when he tried to stop her from hauling water. "And neither am I. You're carrying my child. That makes you precious cargo." Anna laughed and kissed him. "Then treat me like precious cargo that can still work, not porcelain that needs to be wrapped in cotton and put on a shelf." Jacob compromised by doing the heaviest work himself and watching Anna like a hawk for any signs of trouble. He'd lost one wife on this land. He'd be damned if he'd lose another, especially now when they were so close to having everything they'd fought for. In July, a letter arrived from Boston. Jacob's hand shook as he opened it, remembering the forged journals, the fraud they'd committed, the sword that had been hanging over their heads for months. But the letter wasn't from debt collectors. It was from the Boston Mercantile Trust, thanking them for the valuable information and informing them that the trust had successfully recovered a significant portion of their losses through legal action against Northern Pacific executives. The records had worked. Their fraud had succeeded so completely that no one suspected the truth. Jacob should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt sick. "What's wrong?" Anna asked, seeing his expression. "Nothing. Nothing's wrong." Jacob folded the letter, tucked it away. "Just business from back east. It's handled." Anna studied him with eyes that saw too much. "The journals?" "They bought it. All of it. We're in the clear." "Then why do you look like you're about to be sick?" Jacob moved to the window, stared out at the land they'd fought so hard to keep. "Because we committed a crime, Anna. We lied and forged documents and defrauded a banking trust. The fact that we got away with it doesn't make it right." "They tried to take our home over a debt I didn't owe," Anna said quietly. "They would have left us with nothing, thrown a pregnant woman out into the world with nowhere to go. What we did was survive. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not asking you to apologize. Jacob rubbed his face, exhausted. "I spent 10 years after Clara died trying to be good enough, work hard enough, suffer enough to somehow make up for not saving her. And now I'm a criminal, a fraud. What does that make me?" Anna crossed the room, took his face in her hands, made him look at her. "It makes you human. It makes you someone who loves his wife enough to break the law to protect her. It makes you the man I married, Jacob Mercer, flawed and stubborn and doing his best in an unfair world. That's enough for me. It should be enough for you. Jacob pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and let her words sink into the places that still ached with old guilt. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to stop punishing himself for being human, for making mistakes, for choosing survival, over some abstract moral code that had never done him any favors. Maybe it was time to forgive himself. August brought a heat wave that turned the valley into an oven. Anna grew increasingly uncomfortable, her belly huge now, her movements slow and labored. The baby was due in early September according to her calculations, but babies came when they wanted to come, and Jacob found himself watching her constantly for signs of labor. "You're making me nervous," Anna said one evening as they sat on the porch trying to catch a breeze. "Stop hovering." "I'm not hovering. I'm being attentive." "You're hovering. You've been hovering for a week. If you don't stop, I'm going to hit you with a frying pan." Jacob grinned despite his worry. "Yes, ma'am." Tom and Charlie were in town getting supplies, which meant Jacob and Anna were alone on the ranch for the first time in weeks. It felt strange after months of constant company, but also peaceful. Jacob sat with his arm around Anna, feeling their baby kick against his palm, and allowed himself to imagine a future where this was normal evenings on the porch, with his growing family watching the sun set over land they'd fought to keep. "Have you thought about names?" Anna asked. "Some. What about you?" "If it's a girl, I want to name her Clara." Jacob's breath caught. He'd been carefully not thinking about his first wife, about how she'd wanted children and never lived long enough to have them, about how she should have been the one sitting here pregnant and happy instead of buried in the ground behind where the old cabin used to stand. "Anna, you don't have to." "I want to." Anna's voice was firm. "Clara was my sister. She brought us together in a way even though she's gone. I want to honor that. I want our daughter to carry her name. And if it's a boy, then you pick." Anna smiled up at him. "What names do you like?" Jacob thought about it, running through possibilities. "My father's name was Thomas. My brother was James, died in the war. Either of those would be fine." "Thomas James Mercer." Anna tested it out. "I like it. Strong name for a strong boy. You think it's a boy. I think it's a baby who's going to be loved and safe and raised on this beautiful land by parents who'd burn the world down to protect them." Anna squeezed his hand. "Boy or girl doesn't matter. They're ours and that's enough." Jacob kissed her slow and sweet, tasting the salt of sweat and the familiar warmth of her mouth. When they broke apart, Anna was smiling that smile that always made his heart skip. "Help me up," she said. "I need to check on dinner before it burns." Jacob hauled her to her feet, steadied her when she swayed slightly. "You all right?" "Fine. Just tired. This baby's sitting right on my—" Anna stopped mid-sentence, her eyes going wide. "Oh. What's wrong?" "My water just broke. Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. "Your what?" "My water. The baby's coming." Anna looked down at the puddle spreading on the porch boards, then up at Jacob with an expression caught between excitement and terror. "The baby's coming right now." For one frozen moment, Jacob's mind went completely blank. Then training kicked in, not from doctoring or midwifery, but from the war, from emergency situations where you had to move fast or people died. He swept Anna into his arms, ignoring her protests, and carried her into the cabin. "Put me down. I can walk. Humor me." Jacob set her gently on the bed, then stood there feeling utterly helpless. "What do I do?" "What do you need?" "Water, clean cloths, whiskey for after assuming I survived this." Anna laughed shakily. "And you need to stay calm because if you panic, I'm going to panic, and that's not going to help anyone." Jacob forced himself to breathe, to think. He'd helped with difficult calvings, had even assisted when one of his fellow soldiers' wives had given birth during a supply stop on the way to Texas. It wasn't that different. Bodies knew what to do. He just had to help and try not to screw anything up. He boiled water, gathered every clean cloth they owned, laid them out within reach. Anna's contractions started coming faster, harder, and Jacob held her hand through them, letting her squeeze until his bones creaked, murmuring encouragement that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You're doing great. You're so strong. Just breathe." "I know I'm strong," Anna gasped between contractions. "I climbed on a train with nothing and came west to live with a stranger. I learned to shoot and ride and survive prairie fires. I can damn well push a baby out." "Yes, you can." The labor went on for hours. Sunset faded to full dark, and still, Anna labored, her face pale and sheened with sweat, her hands gripping Jacob's with desperate strength. He stayed with her through all of it, wiping her face, encouraging her, trying not to let his terror show when she screamed with pain. "I can't," Anna sobbed at one point. "Jacob, I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can. You're almost there. Just a little more." "I'm so tired." I know, sweetheart, but you can't give up now. Our baby needs you to keep fighting." Anna looked at him with exhausted eyes, nodded once, and bore down with renewed determination. Jacob moved to check her progress and saw the baby's head crowning. "I can see it, Anna. I can see the baby." "Then get it out." The next contraction brought the head fully out, and Jacob supported it with shaking hands, terrified he'd do something wrong. One more push and the shoulders came free, and then the baby slid into Jacob's arms in a rush of fluid and blood. For one horrible moment, the baby didn't make a sound. Jacob's heart stopped. The baby was blue, silent, limp in his hands. No, this couldn't be happening. They hadn't survived everything just to lose their child in the first moments of life. Jacob cleared the baby's mouth with his finger, rubbed its back hard. Come on, breathe." Nothing. "Breathe." Jacob's voice cracked. "Please, God, let this baby breathe." Then the baby gasped, coughed, and let out a furious wail that was the most beautiful sound Jacob had ever heard. Color flooded into its skin, turning it from blue to healthy pink, and the crying got louder and more indignant with each breath. "Is it all right?" Anna was trying to sit up, her voice desperate. "Jacob, is the baby all right?" "It's perfect." Jacob was crying. He realized dimly, tears streaming down his face as he cleaned the baby and wrapped it in a blanket. "We have a son, Anna. We have a boy." He placed the baby in Anna's arms, and she looked down at their child with an expression of such pure love and wonder that Jacob felt his heart crack open. Anna was crying too, kissing the baby's head, counting its fingers and toes, whispering words Jacob couldn't quite hear. "Thomas James Mercer," Anna said, looking up at Jacob with shining eyes. "Welcome to the world." Jacob sat on the edge of the bed, put his arms around his wife and son, and felt something settle into place deep in his chest. This was what he'd been searching for through 10 years of grief and loneliness. Not just survival, but this family love hope, a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. "Thank you," he whispered to Anna. "Thank you for coming here. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me this." Anna kissed him soft and sweet. "Thank you for letting me." Tom and Charlie returned from town the next morning to find Jacob sitting on the porch with a bundle in his arms and a grin on his face that wouldn't quit. They whooped and hollered, slapped Jacob on the back, and demanded to see the baby. Jacob showed them Thomas, who was sleeping peacefully despite all the noise, and felt a pride so fierce it was almost painful. "You're a father," Tom said, shaking his head in wonder. "Never thought I'd see the day when old Jacob Mercer was a family man again." "Neither did I," Jacob admitted. "But here we are." Anna recovered quickly from the birth, much faster than Jacob expected. Within a week, she was up and moving around, insisting on doing light chores despite Jacob's protests. Within 2 weeks, she was back to her normal routine, just with a baby strapped to her chest while she worked. "You're going to wear yourself out," Jacob warned. "I'm fine. The baby's fine. Stop worrying." Anna adjusted Thomas in his sling, kissed his downy head. "Besides, he likes being with me while I work. Soothes him." Jacob couldn't argue with that. Thomas was a remarkably calm baby, content to sleep or watch the world with wide, dark eyes, while his mother moved through her day. He had Anna's hair color and Jacob's nose, and when he smiled, which he started doing around 3 weeks old, he looked exactly like Clara had in the photograph on the dresser. The photograph Jacob still kept but face up now. Because Anna was right, Clara deserved to be remembered, honored, woven into the fabric of their new life. She wasn't a ghost anymore, wasn't a source of guilt or pain. She was just Clara, loved and missed, and part of the foundation on which Jacob and Anna had built their happiness. September slipped into October, and the valley began its annual transformation into autumn gold. The garden produced better than expected, and Anna spent days canning and preserving, laying up stores for winter. Tom and Charlie helped with the final preparations, chopping firewood, repairing the barn roof, making sure the livestock were settled before the snow came. Life was good. Hard, but good. Jacob would wake each morning to the sound of Thomas fussing, and Anna murmuring to him, would spend his days working land he loved, would come home each evening to a warm cabin and a hot meal and a family that was his. He should have known it couldn't last. The rider came on a gray October morning, appearing out of the mist like something from a bad dream. Jacob saw him from the north pasture where he was checking cattle, watched him ride straight to the cabin, and felt ice form in his gut. He spurred his horse and rode hard for home, arriving just as the rider was dismounting. The man was young, maybe 25, wearing a badge that identified him as a territorial marshal's deputy. He had the look of someone who'd ridden hard and far, and his expression was serious as he turned to face Jacob. "Mr. Jacob Mercer." "That's me." Jacob dismounted, kept his hand near his rifle. "What's this about?" The deputy pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have a warrant for your arrest, sir, and for your wife, Anna Mercer. You're both charged with fraud and conspiracy to defraud the Boston Mercantile Trust." Jacob's world tilted. The journals. Someone had figured out the journals were fake. After 4 months of safety of thinking they'd gotten away with it, the law had finally caught up with them. "There must be some mistake," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. "My wife and I haven't done anything wrong. The trust hired an expert to analyze the journals you provided. He determined they were forgeries, added entries that didn't match the original ink or paper aging. You've been charged with fraud, Mr. Mercer. I'm authorized to take you both into custody." The cabin door opened and Anna appeared, Thomas in her arms. She took one look at the deputy at Jacob's face and went pale, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "How long do we have?" The deputy blinked clearly, not expecting cooperation. "Ma'am, how long before you take us in? I need to make arrangements for our son. He's only 6 weeks old. He needs—" Anna's voice broke. "He needs someone to care for him if we're going to be in jail." "Anna, no." Jacob moved toward her. "We can fight this. Get a lawyer, argue the case." "With what money, Jacob? We're barely scraping by as it is. We can't afford a lawyer." Anna looked at the deputy. "What are we looking at prison time? If convicted, likely 5 to 10 years for fraud. Could be more depending on the judge." 10 years. Jacob's knees went weak. 10 years in prison while his son grew up without him. 10 years away from Anna, from the life they'd built, from everything that mattered. He couldn't do it. Couldn't survive losing everything again. "There has to be another way," Jacob said desperately. "We'll pay back the trust, work out a deal." "It's beyond my authority, Mr. Mercer. I'm just here to bring you in." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "I can give you an hour to settle your affairs, make arrangements for the child, pack what you need, but then we have to go." Anna nodded, her face set with grim determination. She turned and went back into the cabin, and Jacob followed, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. They could run, try to make it to California or Mexico. But they had a baby now, couldn't just disappear into the wilderness. They could fight, refuse to go peacefully. But that would just make things worse, could get them, or the deputy killed. There was no way out. Inside the cabin, Anna was moving with mechanical efficiency, packing a bag with clothes and supplies. Thomas lay on the bed, gurgling, happily unaware that his parents' world was falling apart. "We'll send him to your neighbors," Anna said. "The Hendersons in town. They have children. They'll take care of him until we can—" Her voice broke, and she stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. Jacob pulled her into his arms, felt her shaking against him. "I'm sorry. God, Anna, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should never have suggested forging those journals. I agreed to it. We did it together." Anna pulled back, wiped her eyes. "We made our choice, Jacob. Now we live with the consequences." "But, Thomas, we'll be safe. We'll be loved. And when we get out, if we get out, we'll find him again. We'll be a family again. Anna's jaw set with that stubborn determination Jacob loved and feared in equal measure. We've survived worse than this. We'll survive this too. Tom and Charlie came in their faces shocked as Anna explained the situation. They both immediately offered to take Thomas to care for him as long as needed, but Anna shook her head. You're cowboys. You can't raise a baby and work a ranch. He needs to be with a family somewhere stable. Anna looked at Jacob. The Hendersons. Tom can take him to town, explain everything. They're good people. They'll do right by him. It was the hardest thing Jacob had ever done, watching Anna bundle up their 6-week-old son, kiss his forehead, and hand him to Tom with whispered instructions about feeding and sleeping and all the tiny details that made up a baby's life. Thomas started to cry, sensing his mother's distress, and Anna's face crumpled. Be good for Tom, she whispered. Mama loves you. Papa loves you. We'll come back for you, baby boy. I promise we'll come back. Tom rode away with Thomas in his arms, and the sound of the baby's crying faded into the distance. Anna stood on the porch watching until they disappeared, her whole body rigid with the effort of not breaking down. Then she turned to Jacob. I'm ready. The deputy tied their hands loosely, a courtesy Jacob recognized because he seemed like a decent man stuck enforcing a terrible situation. They rode away from the ranch with Charlie promising to keep things running until they returned, though none of them mentioned the very real possibility that they might never return. The ride to Rawlins took 3 hours. 3 hours during which Jacob's mind ran through every memory of the past year, Anna sitting in Claire's chair reading her diary, Anna learning to shoot, Anna standing in the bedroom doorway telling him she loved him, Anna laboring to bring their son into the world. All of it might be over now. All of it might become just another ghost to haunt him. When they reached Rawlins, the deputy took them straight to the territorial jail, a squat stone building that looked more like a tomb than a place for living people. The jailer processed them with bored efficiency, took their possessions, led them to separate cells. Anna, Jacob called as they were being separated. She turned, and even in the dim light, he could see tears streaming down her face. I love you, he said. No matter what happens, I love you. We'll get through this. I love you too. Anna's voice broke. Take care of yourself, Jacob. For Thomas. For me. Don't give up. Then she was gone, led away to the women's section, and Jacob was alone in a cell that smelled of old sweat and despair. He sank onto the narrow cot, put his head in his hands, and for the first time since Clara died, he prayed. Not for himself. For Anna, for Thomas, for the family he'd finally found and was about to lose. He prayed for a miracle. The miracle came 3 days later, though Jacob didn't recognize it at first. He'd spent those 3 days in a fog of despair eating when the jailer brought food, sleeping fitfully on the hard cot, spending hours staring at the stone walls and trying not to think about Anna in a cell somewhere nearby, or Thomas crying for parents who weren't there. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week, and after that would come the trial, the conviction, the sentencing. 10 years in prison, maybe more. By the time he got out, Thomas would be a boy who didn't remember his father. Anna would be a stranger. Everything they'd built would be gone. Jacob was contemplating these cheerful thoughts when the jailer appeared at his cell door with an unexpected visitor. Someone here to see you, Mercer, the jailer said, unlocking the door. Says he's your lawyer. Jacob looked up in confusion. I don't have a lawyer. You do now. The man who stepped into the cell was in his 50s, well-dressed in a tailored suit with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He carried a leather document case and had the bearing of someone used to commanding rooms. My name is Richard Caldwell. I've been retained to represent you and your wife. By who? We don't have money for a lawyer. Caldwell sat down on the one chair in the cell, set his document case on his lap. Actually, you do. Or rather, you did. The Boston Mercantile Trust has decided to drop all charges against you both. Jacob stared at him, certain he'd heard wrong. What? The charges are being dropped. You and Mrs. Mercer are free to go as soon as the paperwork is processed. Caldwell opened his case, pulled out several official-looking documents. I've been instructed by the trust to inform you that they no longer wish to pursue legal action. In fact, they're offering a settlement. I don't understand. Jacob's mind was reeling. They hired an expert. He proved the journals were forged. Why would they drop the charges? Caldwell's expression turned shrewd. Because it turns out the journals weren't entirely forged. Oh, the entries you added were fake. The expert was right about that. But the original journals themselves contained information that proved extremely valuable to the trust. Information about stock manipulations, insider trading, political corruption that went much deeper than anyone suspected. Your wife's aunt apparently was involved in some very shady dealings before she died. Jacob felt like the ground was shifting under him. But we made that up. The railroad bribes, the insider information, we invented all of it. Did you? Caldwell leaned forward. Or did you simply highlight and embellish information that was already there in code or implication? The expert analyzed the forgeries, yes, but in doing so, he also analyzed the original entries. And what he found was a pattern of financial manipulation that the trust was able to use to recover millions of dollars from corrupt officials and fraudulent investors. Millions, Mr. Mercer. Far more than the $5,000 you supposedly owed. Jacob's mind was spinning. They'd forged entries into journals that actually contained damaging information. How was that possible? Unless Margaret Whitmore really had been involved in the kind of schemes Anna had made up, and they'd just gotten lucky by inventing crimes that happened to be true. So we're free, Jacob said slowly. Just like that. Just like that. The trust considers the matter closed. They've even agreed to pay you and your wife a finder's fee of $1,000 for providing the information that led to their recovery. Caldwell smiled thinly. I suspect they want to avoid the embarrassment of admitting they almost prosecuted the very people who helped them. Easier to make the whole thing go away quietly. Jacob felt tears burning his eyes. Free. They were free. He could go back to the ranch to Thomas, to the life they'd been building. When can we leave? Within the hour. I just need you to sign these documents acknowledging the settlement and agreeing not to pursue any counterclaims against the trust. Caldwell spread the papers on the small table. I'd advise you to read them carefully, but the terms are straightforward. You get your freedom and some money. They get their silence and no lawsuits. Jacob read through the documents quickly, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen when he signed. It all seemed too good to be true, like a dream he'd wake from any moment. But Caldwell gathered up the signed paper, stood, and extended his hand. Congratulations, Mr. Mercer. You're a free man. The jailer brought Anna to him 20 minutes later. She looked thin and pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and grief. But when she saw Jacob standing in the jail's front room alive and unshackled, she let out a sound between a laugh and a sob and ran to him. Jacob caught her, held her so tight he was afraid he might hurt her, but she just clung to him and cried into his shoulder. We're free, Jacob said into her hair. Anna, we're free. They dropped the charges. We can go home. Anna pulled back to look at him, her face streaked with tears. How I don't understand, Jacob explained as best he could, while Caldwell stood by patiently. Anna's expression shifted from disbelief to confusion to something that looked almost like hysterical amusement. We accidentally told the truth while lying, she said. My aunt really was involved in fraud. Apparently so, and we gave the trust everything they needed to prove it. Jacob cupped her face in his hands. I don't care how it happened. We're free and we're going to get our son back and go home. They signed out at the jail, collected their possessions, and walked out into the October sunlight as free people. It felt surreal, like stepping from a nightmare into a world too bright and real to be believed. Anna kept touching Jacob's arm, as if to prove he was solid, while Jacob couldn't stop looking at his wife, marveling that they'd survived this. Where's Thomas? Anna asked suddenly, her voice sharp with renewed urgency. We need to get Thomas. They found Tom at the Henderson house where he'd been staying since bringing the baby to town. The Hendersons had taken Thomas in without question, and Mrs. Henderson met them at the door with the baby in her arms, clearly reluctant to let him go. He's been such a good baby, she said, tears in her eyes. Barely fussed at all. I'll miss him. Anna took Thomas with shaking hands, held him close, breathed in his baby smell. Thomas blinked up at her, made a small cooing sound, and Anna broke down completely, sobbing into his blanket while Jacob wrapped his arms around them both. Thank you, Jacob said to the Hendersons over Anna's shoulder. Thank you for taking care of him. We're in your debt. No debt, Mr. Henderson said gruffly. Just glad you're all right. That whole business seemed wrong from the start. Glad it got sorted out. They stayed in Rollins one more night. Anna refused to ride home with Thomas in the dark and checked into the hotel with the settlement money Caldwell had given them. It felt like luxury after the jail cells, even though the room was small and the bed lumpy. Anna sat up most of the night nursing Thomas and crying quietly while Jacob held her, neither of them able to quite believe they were really safe. The ride home the next day was slow and careful, Thomas bundled in a sling against Anna's chest. The October sun was warm and the valley had never looked more beautiful. The aspens burning gold against the blue sky, the river running silver in the distance. When the ranch came into view, both Jacob and Anna started crying again, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of being able to come home. Charlie met them in the yard, whooping with joy when he saw them. Tom rode ahead to tell me the news. I can't believe it, we thought you were gone for years. So did we. Jacob dismounted, helped Anna down. How are things here? Managed fine. Cattle are good. No major problems. Was starting to wonder if I should contact your lawyer about what to do with the place long term, but thank God I don't have to now. They spent the evening celebrating sharing a meal of venison and potatoes while Thomas slept in a basket by the fire. Tom had returned from town, and the four of them sat around talking and laughing with the giddy relief of people who'd narrowly avoided disaster. Jacob kept looking at Anna at Thomas at the cabin they'd built with their own hands, hardly able to believe it was all still theirs. That night after Tom and Charlie had gone to the barn and Thomas was sleeping peacefully, Jacob and Anna lay in bed holding each other in the darkness. I thought I'd lost everything again, Jacob said quietly. When that deputy showed up when they took us away, I thought history was repeating, that I'd lose you the way I lost Clara, that I'd spend the rest of my life alone and broken. But you didn't lose me. Anna's fingers traced patterns on his chest. We survived Jacob, together, the way we always do. We got lucky. If your aunt hadn't actually been a criminal, if the trust hadn't found real evidence in those journals, then we would have figured something else out. We would have fought. We would have survived. Anna propped herself up on one elbow, looked down at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. Stop waiting for everything to fall apart. Stop expecting to lose the things you love. Maybe it's time to just accept that we're happy and we're together, and that's allowed to last. Jacob pulled her down and kissed her, pouring all his fear and relief and love into it. I'll try, he said when they broke apart. I promise I'll try. They made love slowly, carefully, relearning each other after days of separation. And afterward, lying tangled together with Thomas sleeping nearby, Jacob felt something he hadn't felt since before Clara died. He felt at peace. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in mid-November. Jacob and Anna settled into their new normal, working the ranch, caring for Thomas, planning improvements for the spring. The $1,000 from the settlement was more money than they'd ever had at once, and they spent hours debating how to use it. More cattle improvements to the barn glass windows for the cabin, maybe even hiring permanent help. We could expand, Anna said one evening as they sat by the fire. Thomas was nursing, making small, contented sounds, and the wind howled outside, but the cabin was warm and safe. Buy the Henderson's south section, double our grazing land. We could. Jacob was carving a toy horse for Thomas, even though the baby was too young to play with it yet. Or we could save it, have something set aside for emergencies. We just survived the worst emergency imaginable. I think we're allowed to invest in our future. Jacob looked at his wife, at the determined set of her jaw, and smiled. A year and a half ago, she'd been a frightened city girl who couldn't cook or ride or survive a day on the frontier. Now she was talking about land acquisition and ranch expansion, like she'd been born to it. All right, he said. We'll talk to Henderson in the spring, see if he's interested in selling. Anna grinned, that bright, fierce smile that still made Jacob's heart skip. We're going to build something amazing here, Jacob Mercer. Something that will last for generations. Our children and their children are going to work this land and remember us. Children plural, you planning on having more? At least 3 more, maybe 4. Anna's eyes danced. You got a problem with that? Not a one. Jacob set down his carving, crossed the room, sat beside his wife and son. 4 more sounds, perfect. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly, just the 4 of them, since Tom and Charlie had gone home to their families for the holiday. Jacob gave Anna a pair of leather gloves he'd made soft and warm and perfectly fitted to her hands. Anna gave Jacob a shirt she'd sewn dark blue wool with neat stitching. They gave Thomas a new blanket and the wooden horse which he promptly tried to eat. It was the best Christmas Jacob could remember. The new year brought challenges: a late January blizzard that lasted 3 days, a cow that died during calving, the perpetual struggle to make the numbers work when nature seemed determined to throw obstacles in their path. But they faced everything together, and somehow that made it all manageable. Thomas grew like a weed, hitting milestones that filled Anna with joy and Jacob with pride. First smile, first laugh, first time rolling over. By spring, he was sitting up on his own, grabbing at everything within reach, filling the cabin with babbling sounds that almost resembled words. He's going to be talking soon, Anna predicted. Probably saying mama first. Going to say dada, Jacob countered. He's got good taste. Thomas solved the debate by saying something that sounded like baba and laughing at both his parents. In March, Jacob rode to the Henderson place and made an offer on their south section. Henderson was getting old, ready to scale back, and he accepted Jacob's price with minimal negotiation. By April, the Mercer Ranch had doubled in size, and Jacob and Anna stood on the ridge looking at their expanded property with a satisfaction that bordered on disbelief. "We did it," Anna said. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jacob corrected. "You came here with nothing and built all this. I was just trying to survive. You made me want to live." Anna leaned against him and they stood together, watching the sun set over land that was theirs, hard-won and precious. Below them, smoke rose from the cabin chimney, and they could hear Thomas crying for his dinner. "We should get back," Anna said. "But Jacob, thank you." "For what?" "For not sending me away that first day, for giving me a chance, for choosing to live again." Anna turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears and joy in equal measure. "For being the man I fell in love with." Jacob kissed her there on the ridge as the sun dropped toward the mountains and the wind carried the smell of new grass and possibility. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Come on," Jacob said, taking her hand. "Let's go home." They walked down the ridge together as the stars began to emerge overhead, their hands linked their sun, waiting for them in the warm glow of lamplight. And as Jacob looked at Anna's profile in the fading light, he realized that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped measuring his life by what he'd lost and started measuring it by what he'd found. A wife who was fierce and brave and loved him despite his flaws. A son who would grow up knowing his father, knowing this land, knowing what it meant to fight for what mattered. A home built from ashes and determination, proof that endings could become beginnings if you were willing to risk your heart one more time. The past would always be there, Claire's memory. The grief that had shaped him, the mistakes and triumphs that had brought him to this moment. But the past didn't own him anymore. He'd let it go just as Anna had told him to do, and in letting go, he'd found something he never expected. He'd found peace. He'd found love. He'd found home. 10 years ago, Jacob Mercer had been a man waiting to die. Now he was a man living truly, living every single day. And as he walked into his cabin where his wife was feeding their son by the fire, as he closed the door against the spring night and felt the warmth surround him, Jacob made a silent promise to the family he'd lost and the family he'd gained. He would never take this for granted. He would never stop fighting to protect it. He would wake up every morning grateful for the miracle of ordinary days and the extraordinary woman who'd walked into his cabin one October afternoon and saved his life. Because that's what Anna had done. She hadn't just stayed. She'd given him a reason to keep going, to build something new from the ruins of the old, to believe that happy endings were possible, even after the darkest chapters. 2 years later, they stood in almost the same spot on the ridge, Jacob, Anna, 3-year-old Thomas, and their new daughter Clara asleep in Anna's arms. The ranch had grown again. Their herd expanded, the cabin rebuilt with glass windows and a proper addition. Tom and Charlie had settled on neighboring land with wives of their own, and the valley was slowly transforming from wilderness to community. "Hard to believe it's only been 3 years, Anna said, watching Thomas chase a butterfly through the grass. "Feels like a lifetime." "Feels like yesterday," Jacob countered. "Still remember the first time I saw you sitting in that chair reading Claire's diary. Thought I was losing my mind." "Maybe you were. Maybe we both were a little bit," Anna smiled. "But we found our way." "We did." Jacob put his arm around her shoulders, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. And we'll keep finding it every day for the rest of our lives. Thomas ran back to them, his face flushed and happy, holding out a dandelion he'd picked. Mama, pretty flower. Anna took it with exaggerated delight. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. Get one for baby Clara, too. That's very thoughtful. Anna ruffled his hair as he ran off again. He's going to be a heartbreaker when he grows up. He's got his mother's charm. Jacob kissed Anna's temple. And his father's stubbornness. God help us all. They stood there until the sun dropped below the mountains and the first stars appeared a family whole and unbroken, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart. And when they finally turned to walk back to the cabin, Thomas running ahead. Anna carrying Clara Jacob's arm around his wife's waist. Jacob felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had led him here. The grief was still there. It always would be. But it no longer defined him. He was more than his losses, more than his mistakes, more than the sum of his suffering. He was a husband and father, a rancher and survivor, a man who'd been given a second chance and had the courage to take it. As they reached the cabin and Anna lit the lamps against the darkness, as Thomas begged for a story and Clara woke up wanting to nurse as the ordinary chaos of family life swirled around him. Jacob caught Anna's eye across the room. She smiled at him, that same bright, fierce smile that had stolen his heart, and Jacob smiled back. This was it. This was everything. Not perfect, not easy, but real and precious and worth every moment of struggle it had taken to get here. The rancher's redemption wasn't about forgiveness or absolution or somehow making up for the past. It was about choosing to live fully in the present, to love without holding back, to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. It was about opening the door when someone knocked, even when you thought you had nothing left to give. It was about taking a chance on hope when despair felt safer. It was about learning that endings weren't always final, that new chapters could begin when you least expected them, that the human heart was far more resilient than it seemed. And as Jacob tucked Thomas into bed that night and kissed his son's forehead as he held Anna close and felt her heartbeat steady against his chest, as he listened to the wind singing across the prairie and the baby's soft breathing from her cradle, he knew with absolute certainty that he would never take any of this for granted. Every day was a gift. Every moment was a second chance. Every sunrise was proof that no matter how dark, the night morning always came. And Jacob Mercer, broken, scarred, and redeemed, was finally truly home.